They gaped, then fell silent, staring at the figure hovering above them. David had ripped Kerrison out of the depths with gravity. As a deep-sea troll, being pulled out of the water should weaken it somewhat, and he wanted them to see his strength. If he chose to, he could take the sacred trident and lay waste to Atlantis. They would do well to obey. Kerrison's vast body smashed down onto the island. The impact made the heavens tremble and the ground heave. Sand and rock spewed into the air. The two of them were nearly knocked off their feet and stumbled backward. The island was barely larger than the beast, so its canyon-wide maw loomed before them. The stench from its throat filled the air. It bellowed, a sound that shredded the clouds and set the hanging geode crystals to quivering. 1,000-meter tentacles lashed out, blasting the atmosphere as they aimed for David. This pulled from their lair intruder who had dared to humiliate it. Gales roared as the octopus-like limbs swept across the sky, tossing pterosaurs like petals in a storm. David planted himself and absorbed the blow with a calm that made him seem immovable. He combined kinetic absorption with gravity manipulation to stop the avalanche of force. Where his arm met the tentacle, a circular shockwave ripped outward. Beside him, Mera, red hair wild, having retreated into the water, raised a wall of current to shield herself and the queen, but even the water curtain disintegrated under the aftershock. Mist filled her mouth. Atlanta caught her before she could be thrown away. David's eyes flared violet and seared into the air. Thin rays cut through the tentacles, and dark blue blood sprayed like a fountain. But even severing dozens of meters off a limb hardly mattered on a creature thousands of meters long. Harder than titanium, he muttered. Kerrison's flesh took the strikes with minimal damage. Then David moved with impossible speed, breaking the sound barrier and slamming into the beast so hard its head rocked back as if struck by a mountain. It stumbled, pain and humiliation burning in its lighthouse-sized eyes. The troll tried to crush him with massive, grinding strikes, but mass cost it speed. David flowed around the blows, letting universe energy condense into thick, blinding cannons that lasered at Kerrison's eyes. Scorched agony forced it to close them. Once sightless, it was a perfect target. He combined gravity and raw physical force, his hits as crushing as the mountain limbs they pummeled, his speed far exceeding the ancient creatures. Thuds rolled across the small world as the deep-sea beast was battered back and forth, unable to mount an effective counterattack. Kerrison was no dumb animal. It had a human-like fury and shame. It tried to dive back into the sea, but every time it turned, David's gravity tether yanked it back. Its pillar-thick forelimbs gouged trenches into the island, but the damage only betrayed its helplessness. The beast's roars faded as its armored shell cracked, teeth flew loose like broken knives, and the water around it ran dark blue with blood. From the bobbing boats in the open sea, Mera and Atlanta watched in stunned silence. The monster that had terrorized Atlantis had been reduced to a thrashing wreck, dealt with by a single man who seemed to treat the whole thing as child's play. Atlanta's mind churned. She had risked everything to reclaim the trident, and remembered how Kerrison had forced her back from the depths countless times. She had believed then that only her eldest son, Arthur, with his rare gift to commune with sea creatures, might ever approach the trident. Not even Poseidon himself could stand before such a force. Now she saw those certainties unmake themselves. David had not only bested the beast, but shattered its armor as if it were brittle rock. "Last strike," David said, and gathered a final pack of kinetic force in a fist that became a mountain fall. The impact sent Kerrison flying. Airwaves roared out for miles. The battered island, already scarred by the battle, split with a deaf crack and collapsed into the abyssal dark sea. Kerrison's hulking body floated like a ruined toy, too injured even to move a tentacle. "It's over." Mera's voice was a whisper. Her face was pale as she stared at David, who hovered alone in the air, breathing hard, dazed and muttering to himself. The earth-shattering battle was finally over. Mera had thought that, given David's strength, even if he couldn't defeat Kerrison after entering the waterfall, he would at least be able to retreat alive, however battered. She never expected the scene that followed. David had dragged Kerrison from its deep-sea lair into the air and pummeled it mercilessly until it lay broken. He hovered above it, and after confirming the creature had lost consciousness, he made a grasping motion. Deep beneath the waves, in Karasan's lair, a skeleton sat on a throne, its bones glowing with a golden light. The golden trident it clutched shone brilliantly, stubbornly resisting the gravity pulling on it. Anger from the remnant soul of the first king of Atlantis, plus 15. You still dare to stop me from taking the trident? You're dead. Don't come back and cause trouble. As David's hand closed around the air, a violent force snuffed out the fragile flame-like glow. The struggling radiance gave a mournful keening and then vanished. The skeleton crumbled to dust and scattered with the seabed currents. The golden trident cut through the water and shot into David's hand. Sunlight-like radiance hit the dispersed mist and refracted into a rainbow. There he hung, mid-air, the sacred trident glowing like a divine scepter. He actually got the trident! Mara, a merperson, craned her head up at him, shock and a complicated mix of emotions on her face. Everything David had said was true. He had always known where the trident was, but had never bothered to claim it because he didn't need it. When he finally did take it, he did so easily. No tricks, no price paid, not even a drop of blood spilled, and the trident guarded by the sea beast Karasan was in his hand. You've got the trident. What do you intend to do with it? Mara asked, trembling, as she and Atlanta waded ashore onto a broken island shard. David toyed with the trident. The metal was unexpectedly hard. His raw strength couldn't bend it. It felt like an ancient divine artifact, and something about it felt familiar. Amazon metal? He wondered if the so-called Poseidon cold iron might actually be the broken weapon of Poseidon from the war with Ares, reforged by the Atlanteans into this trident. You've proven you have the power to overturn the ocean, Mara said, voice tight. Your aim is squarely at Atlantis. As a princess of the Atlantean race, how could I not be nervous? Mara bit her lip, admitting her fear. She looked at David as one might look at a dormant undersea volcano that could explode and consume everything at any moment. I prefer conquest to wanton destruction. As long as your people submit willingly and don't resist to the end, I will not unleash carnage. David swung the trident experimentally. Winds and clouds gathered instantly. With a sweep, the ocean swelled into 100-meter waves that crashed into the sky. The sacred trident can command the sea. Atlanta watched the display, her expression tangled with nostalgia and loss. The trident her people had lost for generations stood in the hands of an outsider, worse, in the hands of this terrifying young man. The sacred trident was supposedly the symbol of supreme imperial power. Whoever held it could claim the mantle of King of the Seven Seas and command the ocean like a conductor with a baton. Yet David clicked his tongue, visibly unimpressed. To him, it was merely another tool. Through his gravity manipulation, he could already perform similar feats. To his eye, the trident was a weaponized version of abilities Mara herself possessed. The sacred trident has been lost for many years, Atlanta murmured. My people have grown to treat it like a legend. Even though it's symbolic, the ocean proclaims that whoever claims it becomes the next ruler of the seven seas, Mara added. But you appearing with it and expecting Orm to yield his throne and all Atlanteans to kneel to you, that seems improbable. There was no sarcasm in Mara's tone, only worry. She feared what would happen if her people refused and provoked David's wrath. David's expression remained casual. He wasn't particularly concerned. If the Atlanteans resisted, he wouldn't waste time massacring them. He could build an unprecedented deep-sea prison and lock them away in the lightless abyss, where they'd be harmless and full of impotent resentment. The thought made Atlanta and Mara both tighten as they watched him toy with the trident like a child with a new plaything. Dark clouds rolled in. The sky dimmed and a storm rose, a massive tornado raging over the ocean's surface as David continued to test the trident's powers. To his surprise, he couldn't yet create and control storms at sea with the same ease as other effects. So this trident isn't completely useless after all, he said. He hadn't sought the trident for power alone. He wanted the legitimacy and the binding claim it offered. Even if righteousness doesn't always change reality, it's effective for silencing objections. If the Atlanteans later resisted his rule, they couldn't very well argue that they had a rightful claim. He had the trident and its endorsement. All right, time to go, David said, ignoring the two women's alarm. He found the way back out of the world's core. A point of the trident projected power and opened a familiar blue light vortex over the ocean. He created a gravity field that enveloped Mera and lifted her upward. "Wait, what about the queen?" Mera exclaimed, noticing Atlanta still standing on the broken island, not lifted by the vortex. "Did I say I was taking her with us?" David asked. Mera had been chosen by him to handle state affairs and keep Atlantis stable during his absence. Mera still has many flaws. She's inexperienced, somewhat soft-willed, and she's willing to make compromises for her people, he said. But this former queen, who has been betrayed and hardened by suffering, is different. After one last look at Atlanta, grim, despairing, David tightened the gravity field and plunged into the vortex, carrying Mera with him and disappearing from sight. Chapter 122. Mera, your father is calling you. David did not kill Karasin after defeating it. Though a monster and nothing like the beast-like Trench, Karasin's intelligence rivaled an adult's. It could even communicate with Aquaman and, strangely, had yielded him a modest tally of emotional points, enough to make it worth sparing. The deep-sea troll was powerful, but not a world-shaping figure. It earned him only a little more than 100 points. The main course, he reminded himself, was the Atlantean race that came next. Breaking through the sea, hanging in midair, David swept a cold gaze over the dense, hostile pack of Trench below. With a single wave of his trident, a raging tide slammed the biting horde back to the seabed. The gravity field he'd created snapped through the sound barrier, pierced the atmosphere, and pointed straight for Atlantis, carrying a troubled Mera along. Pacific Ocean, seabed. Atlantis Royal Palace. The white Grand Hall, ribbed like whale bones, was sacred and majestic. Orm, exuding authority, sat on the throne in dazzling silver armor and a coral-crowned helm. Beside him sat Nereus and the king of the fishermen. Elite Atlantean warriors in white high-tech battle armor and officers from the other tribes bowed to the dais and reported. "Your Majesty, your two kings, we dispatched personnel and vessels to search the seas. To date, we've combed the Red Sea, the Venetian Sea, and the Caspian Sea. There's been no trace of the criminal." "Search again," Orm snapped. Orm slammed his shining silver trident down like a scepter. Water waves rolled through the hall. Everyone fought to keep their footing and bowed lower, sensing the rage of the king of the seven seas. "His Majesty's will is our will," they intoned. Nereus sat on the seat to Orm's left. The fisherman king, green-skinned and scaled, his lower body a thick fishtail, sat on the right. The three kings issued orders to their forces. "We were once one people," Orm said grimly. "Though evolution has altered our appearance, we remain Atlanteans. For decades, the land dwellers have polluted our oceans and treated our home like a dumping ground. Now our princess, our future queen, has been carried off by a filthy land dweller, and we do not know where she is. I propose we declare war on the land dwellers and make them pay." The fisherman king's voice was cold. "An ancient idea runs in our blood. Sooner or later we would clash with the surface people for living space. They are young in technology and stubbornly call themselves masters of the earth. I will gladly join in reminding them of our power." "Very well." Orm rose and laughed, ready to order the armada to attack every surface vessel at sea. All that remained was the formal command to mobilize. "A criminal is forcing Princess Mera to surface above the city." A guard burst in and knelt, delivering the report. Orm's face flickered between fury and disbelief. Volko had told him that a land dweller had brazenly struck at Atlantis, claimed to know the location of the sacred trident, and then destroyed the recorder. Boastful nonsense, Orm had thought. Now the dome of the palace, built from deep-sea stone, was ripped open as if a tin can had been torn, and elite warriors spilled toward the breach with weapons raised. High above the hall, a figure stood with a golden trident, looking down from a high position, and beside him stood Orm's fiancée, Princess Mera, calm and obedient. At the sight, Nereus bolted upright, anxiety written across his face. The roar of the palace being torn open echoed across the seabed. Atlanteans everywhere looked toward the breach. Orders crackled through communicators. Palace guards and the armies outside ascended to encircle the intruder. David relaxed, holding the trident, allowing the ranks, warriors in differing armor and gear, to surround him from a distance. He did not appear like a prisoner. He looked like a sovereign inspecting his forces, nodding faintly. Except for the brine, Almost everyone's here, he thought. That would save him some trouble. The Brine, who dwelt in isolated deep-sea volcanic zones, were the only tribe absent, and he did not expect them to answer Orm's summons. He had no great expectations of Orm anyway. This near-defunct king served his own grievances and ambitions. Orm rose above the city, purple cape billowing. He pointed his trident at David. "Land dweller, put down your weapon and surrender. I will see you executed fairly." Disgust and anger hardened his voice. In Orm's eyes, David was a surface scum who had sullied their bloodline, his mother's coupling with a land dweller, a stain that had once earned her death. Nereus aimed his energy-emitting trident at David as well. The Fisherman King sneered. "When your ancestors were still eating raw meat, we already ruled the world." High-tech guns, capable of punching holes through hulls, were trained on David. Nereus believed Mera must be trapped inside David's gravity field, isolated above the water, and he urged the girl to come to him. "Daughter, I will save you." David let the encircling pressure wash over him, then smiled. "Mera, your father is calling you." He released the gravity field. The barrier dissolved, and Mera slipped back into the surrounding seawater. Nereus's voice rang out, urgent and raw. "Daughter, come quickly." 124. "I am the king of the seven seas." Nereus called out urgently. His daughter could be here in an instant if she used her command of water. On the battlefield, Orm stared at the woman who would be his queen. "Mera, you should surrender. You can't defeat him," she said, surprising everyone by speaking so plainly to her father. Nereus's eyes widened. He glared at David. "Land dweller, what have you done to my daughter?" Orm's face darkened. In front of his countless subjects, his future queen was urging surrender. How could he allow that? Slowly, he issued orders. "Be careful. When the battle begins, do not harm my queen. Her mind has been tampered with by the enemy." Mera met her father's gaze, shook her head, and bit her lip, refusing to flee. "Father," she began, and then turning to the crowd, she called out with authority, "Stop fighting. He is the chosen king of the seven seas." Those words shocked the assembly. All eyes fell on the golden, three-pronged weapon in David's hand. It shimmered as if cast from metal and light. Whispers spread through the ranks, the lost sacred trident. For generations, the legend has said, whoever possesses the sacred trident and is acknowledged by it can become king of the seven seas, ruler of the oceans, supreme among us. The civilians and soldiers below remembered the old stories all at once. "Is that the sacred trident?" someone cried. "The greatest treasure of our people, lost for thousands of years." "But he's a land dweller," another protest shot back. "How could he ever be recognized by it?" Orm's eyes flashed cold. He gave a single command: "Seize this criminal who dares provoke the great Atlantis." Confusion rippled through the lines. David wore surface dweller clothing and resisted contact with the water. He didn't look Atlantean at all. The trident had been a legend for millennia. Could an outsider have found it so quickly? "Charge!" Orm, Nereus, and the king of the Fisherman Kingdom all shouted together. Laser rifles spat across the battlefield as scores of armed Atlantean warriors surged like a hunting pack. They were about to fall on David when he lifted the trident with a calm, almost casual motion. The sea itself answered. The water convulsed violently, as if in rage. Tremors rolled through the depths. Currents and tides erupted from the seabed, enormous and wrathful. Elite Atlantean warriors, whose bodies were like living steel, were hurled through the air. The disciplined army was scattered in an instant. Men and women clutched at wounds and tumbled into ruined buildings, horror-struck at how quickly their encirclement had dissolved. "The sea is moving like an army. Could that truly be the sacred trident?" someone whispered. It was exactly as the legends described. Chaos broke out among the spectators. The sacred trident had returned. Could this outsider really be the one chosen? David's voice cut through the cacophony, soft but carrying over the roiling water. "Do you wish to continue?" With a single, precise motion, he shattered the united offensive of the three Atlantean houses. The tremors subsided slowly, leaving a stunned silence. Only a few dozen nobles, those with even a hint of royal blood, managed to stay upright above the city's broken streets. Orm lowered his arms that had tried to hold back the water. Shock and fury contended in his gaze as he fixed his stare on David, predator and prey shifting roles in an instant. He tasted a power that felt true and ancient. He must have deceived Volko and hidden the real device, Orm snarled to himself. But how could he have gained the trident's recognition? Nereus's face was a mask of disbelief. He looked at his daughter, seeking answers in her expression. Mara forced a strained smile and shook her head, pleading silently for him not to keep fighting. The trident, the king of the fishermen, blurted, surprised beyond measure. He stared at the golden weapon, uncertain whether to continue the assault. Mara seized the moment, stepping forward to reason with their people. She needed them to understand what they had witnessed, and she needed to answer the question on everyone's mind. Who was this man? Your Majesty, great ones, Mara called, voice ringing over the ruined square. That is a genuine trident. I saw him take it. He defeated the deep-sea troll Kerosene. The name landed like a blow. Kerosene, ancient legend, a monstrous creature as large as an island, capable of crushing cities with little effort, had been whispered about in the same breath as the trident. Faces changed. The Fisherman King hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapons. Nereus believed his daughter would not lie. For the briefest moment he wavered. Thousands of years have passed, he muttered. Even if Kerosene survives, he must be unrecognizable now. Orm watched his allies falter and, angered by their apparent fear, barked orders to his elite guard. Orm, the Fisherman King reminded him coldly, the one the sacred trident acknowledges is the king of the seven seas. That is law and legend. The implication stung. A king acknowledged by the trident outranked any hereditary title Orm claimed. He sent 24 elite noble warriors forward with overwhelming force, enough, they believed, to rip warships apart. But the sea retaliated. A crushing surge of current slammed them back, smashing through the royal palace's facades. The attackers fell, bones shattered, limbs torn, motionless in the gutters. David had done more than command the sea. He had drawn on a gravity-like force as well, bending the battlefield to his will. He remained composed, the trident against his shoulder, as the last of the charges subsided. Lay down your weapons, Orm, he said quietly. Nereus's hesitation vanished. He met Orm's eyes, now filled with a new kind of wrath, and the trident pulsed in David's grip, aimed unflinchingly at Orm. You cowards and weaklings, David added, the words cutting through the ranks. Orm exploded. He swung his trident like a battering ram and launched himself forward, a living water cannon aimed straight at David. His voice was a roar. It's just an object. Even if it names one the king of the seven seas, that honor should belong to me. Clang! Orm refused to give up the throne. He swung his trident directly at David. David met him with a one-handed horizontal sweep of his own trident, and the two sacred weapons met with an earth-shuddering crash. A giant surge rose from the seabed like the wake of a leviathan. Orm's body flew backward and slammed into the palace wall. The raw, boundless power on display stunned everyone. In the previous strike, the silver trident had not burst with golden light, and the seawater had not changed, so this force, was it David's own? Orm possessed the strongest Atlantean bloodline in the seven seas, yet even his furious attack could not withstand a single blow from David. How could that be? Land dweller, I am the king of the seven seas, Orm roared. In the palace ruin, the silver trident bent. Orm's hands trembled, his lips split, and blood tainted the water. Under everyone's eyes, the flustered prince realized the gap between him and David. Enraged, he forced a new eruption of power, gripped his weapon, and charged again. Orm, stop, Mara cried, stepping in front of David. She manipulated the water to form a barrier, trying to block Orm and end the futile attack. She had risen to queen, and if possible, wanted to save the youngest son of the royal line. She also feared that Orm's actions would implicate her people with David. A current strong enough to shatter stone surged forward, but Orm's trident sliced through it. Facing his former fiancée, now standing with his enemy, Orm's eyes bled white with rage. He thrust his trident toward her throat with intent to kill. The tip arrived in an instant. Mara spun the water into a vortex around the silver trident, attempting to deflect it. But Orm's murderous blow did not yield. After a brief stalemate, the water thinned and the trident's tip plunged toward Mara's vital spot. "Daughter!" Nereus shouted, horror and fury in his voice. Mara felt death's breath on her neck, like the gaping maw of a shark. Fear flickered across her face. Then the water suddenly solidified, hard as steel. Orm's trident struck an unyielding barrier and could not move an inch. He strained until his face flushed and veins bulged, roaring until the sound faded, but the trident would not budge. David had raised his palm, manipulating the water through a crushing gravity field, pressing it up and locking Orm in place. Orm realized, too late, that not only his weapon but his whole body was trapped as if embedded in dense alloy, squeezed by mountains from every direction. He could not move. His bones creaked under unbearable pressure. Mara staggered back, shaken and astonished. Looking at David with lingering fear, she had not expected him to save her. "Your tricks end here." David's voice was cold. He twisted the gravity field and snapped Orm's head to the side with growing force. Orm fought, unleashing tens of thousands of tons of power, enough to sink a submarine, but it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. With a soft final crack, Orm's neck snapped. The trident fell from his loosened fingers and sank to the seabed. His whole body went limp. Even in his element, Orm's strength had been no match for David's command of power. Without David's gravity control, defeating him here would have been a different matter, but it was done. Orm was dead. "From this day forward, the Atlantean people shall be under my rule," David declared. "Those unwilling may step forward." He did not look at Orm's corpse sinking to the sand. His gaze swept the assembled Atlanteans like a sovereign's inspection. The crowd lowered their heads in unison, afraid to meet his eyes. "Your Majesty, the sacred trident has recognized you. You are the undisputed king of the sea." The king of the Fisherman Kingdom intoned solemnly and placed a hand to his chest. Nereus, once only marginally less powerful than Orm, awkwardly bowed. His eyes flicked, calculating. He had no confidence in resisting David after seeing such overwhelming power. Yet one thing nagged at him. David had scarcely touched the seawater, acting nothing like an Atlantean. If he wasn't one of them, how had the sacred trident accepted him? Their fear kept their questions silent. No one dared to speak while fresh dread of David's might still held them. That suited David perfectly. After bringing the Zeeble Kingdom and the Fisherman Kingdom back under Atlantean rule, David marched on the Brine Kingdom. Its crab-like king was hot-tempered and coarse, but seeing David wield the long-lost sacred trident and display incomprehensible power, he submitted rather than resist. The palace was renovated into something grander and more majestic than before, and David moved into the royal seat. He delegated the tedious daily state affairs to Mara, naming her regent. "A few rumors about you have been circulating in the palace," Mara said a few days later when she came before him in the White Palace. She hesitated before speaking. David propped his chin, appearing unconcerned. "Oh, what rumors? Tell me." "It is said that you are not Atlantean," Mara said. "They say you are a land dweller, and that you obtained the trident by improper means." "What do you think, Mara?" David asked, as if this were merely gossip at court. "Of course they are false," she said, though her voice betrayed strain. "There are elements in the kingdom trying to spread these rumors and shake your Majesty's rule. I recommend arresting them all." David waved a hand. "Let them spread. If they're rumors, they'll collapse on their own." Mara stared, shocked. She had expected outrage, orders for arrests, or even executions to quash the threats to his throne. Instead, he dismissed them outright. She could only force a smile and lower her eyes. Inwardly, she shivered. Was he supremely confident, or was he waiting to manufacture unrest so he could crush it and teach Atlantis a bloody lesson? The man on the throne gave no hint of violence now. He seemed not to care about the imperial power he had just seized. Mara thought he might be fishing for rebellion, and she silently vowed, if that happened, to stop it. "I might have to leave for a while. The kingdom's internal affairs will be left to you." David rose slowly. "Now." Mara's astonishment deepened. David had just taken an alien throne. His power and the loyalty of the people were not yet secure. Why leave at such a precarious moment? She hid her surprise and nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." David stood at the window for a moment, watching the sea. He had read the mood of Atlantis perfectly. The rumors were true. The trident had accepted a non-Atlantean, but that fact alone would not have spread widely if not for his own choices. First, he had isolated himself in a force field before and after taking the throne, like someone who feared a single drop of seawater. That made people suspicious. Second, he had not produced a royal record to prove a royal bloodline connection. Third, he had not tightly controlled speech. he'd been outwardly lenient. Those missteps invited doubt, and David had allowed them. If he had wanted merely to secure rule, he would have handled those things. But his goal was conquest, and doubt and unrest were tools. Mara clutched her hands inwardly and resolved to prevent trouble. If rebellion flared while David was gone, she would be ready. Meanwhile, far from the sea, the cold, boundless cosmos glittered with stars like scattered diamonds against a black curtain. Sinestro, I'm at maximum speed. Tell Ventala I'll arrive soon. Abin Sur said into the ship's communicator, his voice grave over the crackling signal. He stood on a vast interstellar vessel making repeated jumps through space. The purple-skinned Sinestro, stern and proud in a Green Lantern combat suit, flickered on the screen. Abin Sur's tone was urgent. He wanted his core comrade to warn whoever remained they were coming. Abin Sur was a legend of the Green Lantern Corps. Formidable, brave, unyielding. He had faced terrible foes many times, and the Guardians often sent him to deal with threats. Yet something about this mission made his face tight with unease. Vantal is dead, Sinestro said. His voice was like stone. What about the planet's inhabitants? Like Talok, Abin Sur answered. All life is gone. Their life energy was drained. It's a silent grave. Yellow residual energy everywhere. Sinestro frowned. That thing is different than before, more powerful. I asked the Guardians about its origin, but the image cut out, the feed suddenly garbled and lost. Drip, drip, drip. Abin Sur glanced at the view screen as his ring flashed warning lights. Danger was approaching. The universe felt suddenly empty, as if everything around him was a fragile illusion. A summons echoed through his chest, an instinctive dread. A blinding yellow flare exploded like a sun slamming into the ship. The hull tore apart. Abin Sur was thrown back like paper in a gale, smashed through a bulkhead and tumbled down the corridor. A monstrous creature, a hideous, ghostly being with writhing tentacles, slammed into the interior. Its shriek seemed to pull at every fear inside him. Abin Sur forced his ring to propel him into flight, firing constructs at the beast, but his energies were like candlelight in a typhoon. The attacks fizzled off Parallax's massive body. Gritting his teeth, he used a massive reserve of power to form a crude laser cannon and fired again and again. For a moment it had an effect. A single tentacle was severed. Parallax roared. It remembered that long ago Abin Sur had sealed it on a barren world. From the torn tentacle rolled a lantern ring. Abin Sur's ring, carved like green jade. He forced it back toward him, grief flashing in his eyes. He raised his improvised weapon and shouted, but Parallax only bellowed back, promising to drain more life, to make the core a spoil of its hunger. The beast's tentacles lashed out with a storm of energy. Abin Sur's shield shattered. A blast struck his chest. He felt his ribs cave and blood fill his throat. With his strength failing, he dove for an escape pod and slammed the launch. The pod shot away, and the ship's monstrous silhouette receded in his window. Inform the Guardians, he gasped into the comlink as his vision dimmed. The universe is at risk. Assemble the core. With his chest shattered and dying, Abin Sur gave his final command to his ring. Proceed to the nearest life planet. Activate the program. Select a successor for the ring. Home. In the pale hours of morning, the sky lightened. David slowed as he returned above the small town and looked down. The house lights were on. Through a kitchen window, he could see his parents moving about, preparing breakfast. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Neither Paradise Island's marble palaces nor Atlantis' sunlit halls had ever made him feel this easy. He could, with the power he held, build a Tower of Babel on Earth if he wished, but it wouldn't matter. Stone has no family. He began his descent. Intelligent life form identified, David Kent of Earth. You possess a willpower capable of overcoming great fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. Whoosh. A streak of green like a falling star shot up from behind him and hovered, emitting a mechanical voice. This is a Green Lantern ring? David raised an eyebrow as the glowing ring, marked with the lantern symbol, arced and slipped onto his finger. He didn't feel the triumphant surge one reads about in comic books. Instead, he inspected the ring with quiet curiosity, thinking about the implications. Did a Green Lantern die near Earth? He glanced up at the stars. Another green streak was already heading toward Metropolis. His brow tightened. When a Green Lantern dies, the ring searches for the nearest being with a strong will and chooses a successor. 2 rings meant at least 2 lanterns had fallen near Earth. Something strange was happening. And yet in the comics, the ring that returned to Earth would have sought Coast City, Hal Jordan's city. Had Metropolis ever had a Green Lantern? As sunlight spilled over the waking city, David scanned familiar faces in his mind. Superheroes, reporters, citizens. A figure in blue and red, cape catching the morning. Clark. He raised an eyebrow. Clark? On the roof of a 6-story building, a crane's main jib had snapped, hanging like an inverted L. The terrified operator clung to the railing, swaying high above the street. Live from downtown Metropolis. An unexplained crane collapse has left a construction worker trapped, an anchor reported. Witnesses say someone will show up any moment. Jimmy, get ready, Lois said, already moving. Rescue cushions had been placed below. She was excited, not worried. Jimmy, freckles and all, clicked photos, already planning to pair shots of the panicked operator with Superman's arrival. He's here. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? A little girl holding a balloon asked. No, it's Superman, her mother corrected with a smile. For years, the city had been safer with him around. Despite being targeted before, he continued to help. The broken crane gave a mournful clang and finally let go with a terrible shudder. No! Help! The operator screamed, certain he would be crushed. Then the arm of the crane began to move. Under the golden morning sun, a tall figure of hope gripped the twisted metal and eased it down. The operator landed, shaken but safe. Sir, I can't hold this forever. Could you come down now? Superman said, voice tired but kind. The operator, suddenly tongue-tied in the presence of his idol, scrambled down and almost bowed. Sorry, it's my first time seeing you up close. I got excited. It's okay. I hope it didn't ruin your morning. Clark set the crane down gently and smiled. He wanted to inspire people, to lead by example, and make more people act like heroes. Bang! A sudden punch sent Clark skidding, bending the crane arm. Pain flared across his face. An impact like a truck. A man staggered from the roof entrance, green light seeping from his eyes and mouth, hands crackling with strange radiation. Be careful, Superman, someone yelled from below. The crowd gasped. He's a metahuman. He's attacking Superman. Clark rose slowly, face pale. The green energy stabbed at him like 1,000 needles. He stared hard at the attacker. What meteor struck him? Is he that purple light man we saw last time? An alien of Superman's race? Jimmy whispered, stunned. No, Lois said, frowning. Green light. The attacker, a middle-aged man reeking of cheap alcohol, raved with hatred. He accused Superman of destroying his life, ruining his marriage, taking his wife, and leaving him destitute. Clark blocked furious punches, trying to reason with a man who clearly had no clear memory of events and who now radiated a dangerous energy Clark couldn't immediately identify. Wait, Clay Ramsey, Clark said at last. The face clicked into place. Half a month ago, Ramsey had been a down-and-out painter and drunk who'd muttered that all Kryptonians should disappear. Ramsey lunged again and again. He claimed that after he accidentally ingested luminous paint, he'd gained this power, and vowed revenge on Superman for personal grievances that, to Clark's knowledge, were distorted and self-serving. Clark ducked and parried as best he could. When he landed a solid blow, he sent Ramsey hurtling into a billboard on the next building. Clark advanced to subdue him. Ramsey's body emitted that odd green radiation, not as potent as pure kryptonite, but corrosive in a way that seemed to eat at flesh and cells, a stain that burned and weakened Clark with each contact. He was already winded and in pain. Whoosh! A green ring, like the other meteor David had seen, flashed in. It arced toward Clark as if it too knew the man it sought. Clark, still wary, lashed out and batted it away with a chunk of broken timber. The ring shot skyward and was caught by an approaching figure. Then a beam of green energy, thick and brutish, smacked Clark like a truck. He flew backward through a wall, blood at his mouth. Ramsey staggered up, triumphant. How do you like that, huh? He gathered more green energy, preparing to cross the gap and finish the job. This'll hurt, he sneered. A shadow fell over him. A voice, cold and precise, cut through the air. Stop. Ramsey looked up. Hovering above, face blank and unreadable, was the stranger who'd caught the ring. Panic turned his bravado into animal fear. He fired another impact. The beam fizzed harmlessly off. The stranger raised a hand. The force that grabbed Ramsey was not energy, but a manipulation of gravity, invisible and absolute. Ramsey's limbs were pinned and stretched as if he'd become a rat on a laboratory table. "Help! I'm being torn apart!" he screamed. The pressure built until it felt like his bones would snap. "Let me go!" "Scum like you never learned to look up," the stranger said quietly. "Before you die, I'll let you understand it." With a flick, Ramsey became a cannonball. The gravity field flung him away from the city, straight up and up until he disappeared into the sunlit sky. He gagged as his lungs burned from the acceleration. The atmosphere thinned, fluids began to vaporize. Within seconds, he froze into a silent, contorted figure, an ice sculpture drifting in space. Clark, coughing blood and clutching his ribs, watched as the figure vanished. He called out weakly, "David, where did you send him?" David hovered nearby, expression distant. Clark's vision was returning, painfully slow. He reached for the ring that had landed in his path almost instinctively. "Intelligent life form identified. Clark Kent of Earth. You possess a will to overcome fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps." The selection words came, the ring sliding onto his finger. The green light that had enveloped David now formed a shield and began to tug them both upward. Clark hesitated, still half-dazed, and accepted the ring's pull. "Detected and cleared. Residual lethal radiation targeting your biology has been neutralized," the ring told Clark as a warm green wash eased the pain in his cells. He felt a lightness he hadn't expected. David, who seemed to understand what was happening without surprise, allowed the ring's force to take him. A green energy shield lifted them and streaked toward the horizon, leaving townsfolk dazed and pointing as their two new lanterns disappeared into the morning sky. Far out at sea, on the deck of a battered escape pod, Abin Sur lay dying. He had landed on this backward planet and clung to life long enough to see the chosen. Two figures had descended on the shore, but neither was what he had expected. Abin Sur's eyes widened and his face stiffened as he watched the image in his mind. He looked from Clark to David, swallowing hard. "A living Kryptonian, and an equally powerful unknown cosmic life form?" he whispered, stunned. The spaceship crashed on Earth. A dying alien with purple skin lay inside the ruined escape pod. This must be Abin Sur. David waved his hand, and a gravity field, like a giant invisible palm, slowly lifted the pod out of the surf and set it down on the beach. He glanced at the ring on his finger. "I still don't know if the ring that was supposed to go to Hal Jordan has chosen Clark or me." "Hey, are you all right?" Clark asked. He shoved open the transparent hatch and pressed down on the alien's chest, trying to staunch the bleeding. "Don't die. I'll get you to a hospital right away." Abin Sur coughed blood and shook his head, each breath a struggle. The ring's power of fear was eating him alive. He had very little time. "No," he rasped. "My name is Abin Sur, a Green Lantern, guardian of Sector 2814. The fear clinging to his wounds looked like maggots on bone. David watched it crawl over the alien's skin and felt helpless. The lantern ring itself had some healing ability. If Abin Sur could have been saved, the successor selection ceremony wouldn't have started. "Don't say anything more," David said softly. "Save your strength. We can get you help in 5 seconds." Abin Sur's fingers trembled as he reached for something beneath the seat. "I must choose my successors before I die. There are 2 rings, mine and my comrade Fantara's from Sector 2811. He looked first at Clark, then at David. David realized the ring already on Clark's hand must be one of Abin Sur's, exactly what he'd suspected. The dying lantern's eyes flicked between them, hope and duty burning through his pain. "The ring first sought out the strongest will," Abin Sur said. "On other worlds, it chose a Kryptonian once, but the Guardians would not allow it. That led to Hal Jordan. This time the choice is," he paused, gasping, "Kryptonian and a powerful unknown race." Clark stared at himself in disbelief. After almost 20 years, could he finally learn where he came from? But when Abin Sur mentioned the other, an unknown powerful race, his attention snapped to David. "I'm an Earthling," he said, bewildered. David shook his head. Abin Sur must have misread him. His physiology was unusual, a side effect of long, strange tinkering with his body. "The rings have chosen you," David told Clark. "Take them, point them at the power lantern, and recite the oath. You'll become members of the Green Lantern Corps. Honored, responsible, the universe needs you." Abin Sur barely had the strength to point. He indicated the power lantern fixed beneath the escape pod's seat. "The universe needs stronger protectors," he said. My last duty is done. I hope the universe will overcome this crisis." He closed his eyes. The greatest among the Corps, he fell silent. Clark looked at the corpse in front of him, stunned and unsure. He had always resisted belonging to any Corps, any organized banner, but the word universe set a cold knot in his chest. He turned to David, needing answers. David explained quietly what the ring had already begun to tell him. "The Green Lantern Corps are led by the Guardians," David said. "They claim to keep order in the cosmos. Their power is will." Clark stared at the ring, then echoed the words as the ring requested. "In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight." The oath pulsed through him. David had already sworn, and when Clark completed the line, a burst of green light flared and the rings activated. A suit of emerald energy folded itself around Clark like woven light. "This feels wrong," Clark muttered, tugging at the edge of the glowing armor. He hated green. He hated the idea of leaving the planet he loved to fight in distant starfields. But Abin Sur's words and the hint of a cosmic threat nagged at him. If the universe was in danger, Earth could not be safe. Information unfurled into Clark's mind from the ring, data about the Corps, their history, their enemies. One entry made his stomach drop. Krypton. David watched Clark's face go white. When Clark looked at him wordlessly, a mixture of panic and anger, David flicked the ring and projected the lantern's files into the air. The entry for Krypton was short and clinical. Krypton, Sector 2183, Andromeda Galaxy. Former living planet, no longer exists. At its height, Krypton was a colonial empire. It subjugated countless inhabited worlds. Its social structure was rigid and corrupt. Birth determined destiny. Offspring of generals became generals, of scientists became scientists. The ruling class suppressed individuality. Kryptonians were described by the Guardians as cold-blooded colonizers. Clark's hands clenched. "My home is gone," he whispered, "and I'm descended from colonizers. Is this true?" David nodded slowly. "Part of it is. Krypton was a powerful empire. The Guardians and the Corps fought them and called that era their darkest time. But the Guardians' records are biased. The Corps wrote their history to make themselves look better." He shook his head. "They say Kryptonians were naturally cold-blooded, but that's not the whole story. Your people were powerful, and their society was corrupt in places, yes. But you, Clark, are you. Don't let someone else's history decide who you are." It was comfort enough. Clark had suspected something like this, that whatever calamity had sent him to Earth, it had been cataclysmic. Knowing his planet's fate stung, but it didn't change who stood beside him now. He looked toward the Andromeda patch of sky and felt a small, empty ache. Then he turned back to the farmhouse, to his family, and steeled himself. Protecting them, and his home, was what mattered. Later, at the kitchen table, Jonathan nearly choked on his tea when they told him. Even knowing his sons were not ordinary, the phrase alien core made him sit up straight. "We don't intend to join them," David reassured Martha, who watched them with worry in her eyes. The two had already been swept into green light on the news. Some explanation was inevitable. "It sounded like the universe itself was in danger," Clark muttered. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do. "If there's a crisis on Oa, I want to see it for myself." David kept his tone light but guarded. Abin Sur's warning hadn't just been rhetorical. The power that had devoured Abin Sur was parallax, the embodiment of fear. It was dangerous enough to have a vendetta, and Abin Sur had once defeated it. If parallax had followed Abin Sur here, there could be trouble for Earth. "Maybe we'll have to leave for a while," Clark admitted. Before anyone could argue, David's gravity field tightened, picking up a slight disturbance. He turned his head toward the sky and saw a figure flying toward the farm. The newcomer's physiology was unmistakably alien, smooth skin, fins at the temples, and he wore a sleek green suit with a lantern ring glinting on his finger. David's brow creased. "Maybe it won't be necessary to go to Oa," he said. "Someone's here." On Oa, in the cold, majestic, open-air sanctuary, the Guardians of the Universe stood like sentinels above each towering stone pillar. Blue-skinned and ancient, their faces were composed, almost disdainful of excess emotion. They had founded the Green Lantern Corps and overseen it since the dawn of time. A hush fell across the plaza as one of them spoke. "A massive beam of light has vanished in the universe." Sinestro, standing among the statuesque figures, felt grief for his mentor, Abin Sur, and a rising anger at the same time. Two planets' inhabitants have been annihilated by an unknown enemy, he said, an enemy that commands the yellow power of fear, and we still don't know who he is. Abin Sur said only one thing before he died, another Guardian replied. It's Parallax. Sinestro fixed the Guardians with an accusing look. He wanted answers, not terse orders to search and prepare for battle. The Corps were not automatons. Their warriors did not live to follow unsigned commands blindly. We know enough to assess whether a larger deployment is necessary, a Guardian intoned, voice flat and ancient. Assess? Sinestro shot back, his tone hot. I can lead the Corps against this enemy. I will prove our golden age is not over. But what are you hiding from us? The Guardians were implacable. After a long beat, one of them finally spoke. We debated fiercely whether to activate what we swore never to touch, the power of fear. The Green Lanterns had maintained order for eons, fighting back darkness across the cosmos, but not every threat bowed before green will. Kryptonians, new gods, and others had tested them. Sinestro had heard references to the Corps' long history, the vague Dark Ages in the Book of Oo, but he still bristled. Fear is too unpredictable. Its risk of corruption is too great. Another Guardian looked toward a broken stone pillar and continued. The emotional spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, acts differently depending on how close its color is to the center. Will, the green, touches the user least. The other colors can consume a user. One of our number, attempting to prove fear could be contained, entered it with good intentions but naive judgment. He was consumed by fear and became our enemy. They told the story of Parallax, once bound deep within a dead planet by Abin Sur, now escaped and growing ever stronger. Sinestro, who had become one of the Corps' most powerful lanterns after Abin Sur's death, felt the question on everyone's lips. Is the power of fear stronger than the power of will? One of the Guardians answered gravely. Will draws on one's inner resolve. The stronger the will, the greater the power. But it has limits. Fear is different. It can feed on the fear of others. Infinite life, infinite fear, endless power. The Guardian's reputation had long been enough to unnerve criminals across countless systems. Parallax may have consumed the fear of entire civilizations. Can our warriors withstand that? Sinestro's face darkened. The Guardians exchanged looks and fell silent before coming to a decision. Then we must fight fear with fear. Sinestro's fists clenched. What did the Guardians think the Corps were for? If he hadn't pressed them, would they have sent their soldiers to die without explanation to cover their mistakes? He forced his anger into a tight, respectful mask. Then make the weapon. Forge a yellow lantern ring. A Guardian opened his palm, and a yellow ring of fear floated toward him. Sinestro's eyes flared. Fear and will share a source, the Guardian said. The ring will respond without lengthy training. Our scouts have traced Parallax toward a living planet called Earth. A vision bloomed in the air. Parallax, a roiling desert-like flow of death and shadow, hurtling through the starry dark in a single, ominous direction. Your mission is to resolve this crisis for the universe, using the Corps' reputation and force, the Guardians warned. But beware the corrosive influence of fear. I will, Sinestro said, gripping the yellow ring. He did not dare put it on in the sanctuary. Controlling himself, he turned and left quickly, the ring in his hand. The Guardians remained, watching the balance of the cosmos as they always had. After a long moment, one of them spoke again, emotionless and calculating. The Corps' fame will make him powerful, but fame alone may not be enough to defeat Parallax. Do not worry, another replied. There are Kryptonians and other powerful life forms. One of the Guardians regarded a distant cosmic nebula coldly. I have arranged for someone to guide them. Tomare streaked through space, following the flare of a fledgling lantern ring. He was inbound to a small town on Earth to meet two new alternate lanterns the ring had chosen. As he neared, an invisible, powerful field hit him like a wall and locked his approach. A high-tech green armor of protective will blinked into being around him reflexively. He frowned. His ring should have warned him. Something was wrong. A field of force blanketed the sky over the town. Two green light figures rose from the streets below. David, standing on a rooftop, frowned at the intruder and used a small application of his nascent power to halt the stranger's advance. Most Green Lanterns are honest and fearless, he muttered, but the little blue men who run the Corps are not. Clark, for the first time, felt the exhilarating, effortless freedom of flight without muscle, like flying in a dream. He turned it over in his mind with the same wonder he'd felt as a child. "I am Tomar Ray of Sector 2813, the alien announced. "It seems you are adapting very well." Tomar Ray's tone was surprised by their composure. Many recruits panic when a ring chooses them. These two seemed unusually steady. Then the ring around Tomar Ray's hand vibrated with an odd warning. He drew back midair. "A Kryptonian?" he said, incredulous. "I thought Krypton was destroyed." Tamari wasn't used to training Kryptonians. Each recruit is supposed to be brought to Oa for familiarization and mentoring. It was core protocol. The ring's assessment of the other new recruit flashed in Tamari's mind, an unknown life form with potential comparable to a Kryptonian. He had been expecting ordinary recruits, humans, sector natives, not this. "We do not plan to join your corps," David said bluntly. Tomara blinked. They sounded small town and stubborn, exactly the wrong attitude for explorers of the universe. "Joining the Corps is voluntary," he said, "but you should learn more. It's a great honor." David toyed with the ring in his hand and looked unconvinced. He suspected the Guardians had ulterior motives. Knowing Clark's a Kryptonian and treating him like an ordinary candidate, have the Guardians really abandoned their millennia of caution about Kryptonians? David did not trust the little blue men to be straightforward. He suspected correctly that a looming war had forced the Guardians to change their stance, and perhaps to use Clark. "Abensur told us the universe might be in danger," Clark said. He had little patience for politics. He wanted to know facts. Tomar Ray's voice went quiet with grief and respect. He had worked adjacent to Abensur and considered him a friend. "You're right. Parallax is roaming this sector, devouring life with fear. If he gathers enough strength, Oa could be his next target. For millions of years, no enemy dared strike us. Perhaps that's why the mission to guide you came so suddenly." He looked at them earnestly. Normally, they would be brought to Oa to learn the Corps' history and understand the weight of the lantern. Now, the urgency of the threat had upended the usual order. "Some of our official members are already searching for Parallax. But for now, let me show you what a lantern ring can do." David kept his skepticism, but curiosity nudged him forward. Tomar Ray led them to a quiet field outside town and demonstrated. Green light spilled from his ring, painting the air with the Corps' history, icons of battles, the light of will and order. "The Guardians harness will as the Corps' weapon," he explained. "Will is one of the universe's most powerful forces. Under the green light, the 3,600 sectors maintain peace. With skill, almost anything is possible." "Anything?" Clark asked. The word hung in the air as if daring the universe itself. Tamari nodded. "The emotional spectrum is an energy field born of the emotions of all living beings. Each color has a sentient counterpart, a lantern entity. These entities need hosts to reach their full potential. Parallax is the living embodiment of fear. Once the host becomes strong enough, Parallax becomes unstoppable." As one of the sentient forces of the spectrum, Tomar Ray went on, Parallax's importance to the fate of the universe cannot be overstated. His current host is one of the original Guardians. David's eyes glinted with a harder light. If he could bait Parallax into focusing on him, if he could make Parallax hate him, he might siphon enough emotional energy to exploit. That thought stirred a dangerous cleverness in him. But Parallax had not yet arrived on Earth. There was time to learn and to prepare. Tamari seemed calm on the surface, but Clark could sense the underlying urgency. The Corps had protected the cosmos for eons. That gave Clark confidence, but he also felt the strange, prickling realization that this was more dangerous than any routine patrol. "The emotional spectrum is subjective," Tomar Ray said finally. "A Green Lantern's will determine how far the ring's power can go. With a strong will, a lantern can perform feats that seem godlike, reshaping matter, moving planets, forging suns, up to the limit set by one's resolve and imagination." David looked down at the ring in his palm. A slow smile touched his mouth. "I wonder how much of the power of will I can bring out with this ring." The lantern ring can turn mental fantasies into reality, construct anything, and simulate properties. From black holes and stars to handsaws and screws, The power and hardness depend on your will. Toma Ray waved his hand. His will coalesced into a glass bottle suspended in midair. He flicked a finger, and the bottle gave a crisp, real sound when it struck the air. Now you two try. He smiled encouragingly. Clark, astonished, extended his ring, held his breath, and concentrated. Green light answered his thought, and a slightly crooked glass bottle formed. Compared to Toma's, it looked like a defective product. Imagine more detail. It's normal not to be proficient at first, Toma said, then looked at David. David raised his hand. Green light condensed into a slender-necked Klein bottle that seemed to fold inward on itself. He raised an eyebrow as he looked at the ring on his hand. A wonderful feeling, like operating a universal printer that obeys your thoughts. Toma turned to the bottle in surprise. I've never seen a newcomer master willpower so quickly. If the ring didn't have David's data tied to it, Toma might have sworn a seasoned Green Lantern stood before him. David's calm was telling. His other skills, especially in manipulating energy and gravity, required precision that translated well to will-based constructs. Now let's see how strong your will is. Toma had his bottle collide with Clark's. The direct test was obvious. The stronger construct would remain. Clark's bottle shattered at the clang. Toma's developed cracks, then shattered into pinpricks of light. He was surprised. If both constructs broke, that meant this newcomer's will could surpass his own, a veteran of the Corps. Everyone has a will, but in peaceful times its strength usually hides, Toma mused. Clark looked inexperienced but potentially fierce when pushed. Very good. Now you two try again. Toma crafted another bottle and sent it at David's. There were cracks in Toma's construct. None appeared on the Klein bottle. Toma's bottle exploded, while David's stayed perfectly intact. Toma's eyes widened. Are all newcomers monsters now? He glanced between them, unsure who was stronger. David casually dispersed his bottle. He had already killed the son of a war god, scared away a host of the Demon King's power, conquered a paradise created by gods, and subdued the rulers of the seas. A little surprise from an alien ring wasn't enough to rattle him. As he was about to teach them a few tips, Toma Ray's ring flashed with a message from OA headquarters. He read it, and his face went ashen. Parallax has reached the planet named Earth in Sector 2814. Toma Ray, responsible for Sector 2813, you must lead 2 core newcomers and eliminate Parallax to protect Earth civilization. To throw 2 newcomers who are just getting used to their rings straight into battle against one of the Corps' most powerful enemies. What is that, if not tossing them into a meat grinder? Toma protested, stepping aside to argue with HQ. The reply was uncompromising, an order from the Corps founders. A powerful enemy threatened the universe. If Parallax grew unchecked, no life would be safe. The Corps must mobilize all available forces. Toma swallowed. I have bad news, he told them, trying to find the right words. Parallax is heading for the planet beneath our feet. I know this is unfair, but the Corps needs you to work together to stop it. When we confront it, you two stay behind me. Parallax? Is it heading to Earth? Clark asked, alarmed. If it threatened the whole universe, why target Earth? David's expression sharpened. He looked in one direction and then spoke quietly. Wait, he's already here. Clark closed his eyes and listened. Even from 1,000 miles away, he could hear the chaos, the screams, the panic. David, sensing through a gravity field, perceived Coast City and the colossal monster looming over it. Parallax. Where are the Green Lanterns? Clark demanded. They might still be en route, Toma said, embarrassed. If they didn't arrive in time, it might fall to them. The 3 shot into the sky toward Coast City. Clark, frantic to save people, accelerated, pushing past what his unfamiliar ring should allow, breaking through hundreds of times the speed of sound in an instant. David kept up effortlessly. Toma Ray, veteran though he was, struggled. He pushed his ring until he flamed at the edges, but the newcomers left him behind. Go ahead, he said, forcing himself calm. He watched them streak away, realizing that when the battle truly began, protection might go both ways. Above Coast City, Parallax floated like a grotesque, glistening octopus, a mass of tentacles thrashing through the clouds. One tentacle gripped a corpse, Abin-Sur's body. Abin-Sur, you finally died. It's a pity I couldn't savor your last breath, Parallax crooned, then crushed the corpse into gore. His eyes, hungry and black, swung to the city below. You can no longer stop me. Let me show you how I drain these fearful insects dry. On the streets, cars lay scattered. People crouched in horror as the sky darkened. The monster exuded fear. Mere exposure made hearts pound, minds freeze. Parallax inhaled, intoxicated by the scent of terror, and opened a cavernous maw. He began to feed, drawing life energy out of trembling people until they became skeletal husks collapsing to the pavement. "Stop, Parallax!" two voices cried as they dove into the fray, streaking across the sky. David fired thick purple impact waves. Clark, wrapped in a gleaming green battlesuit and bearing the core symbol on his chest, shot heat vision. Red and purple beams tore at Parallax, vaporizing steel and forcing it backward. "It's Superman!" someone shouted. "And Purple Light Man!" another added. The terrified crowd found hope in the two figures. Parallax recoiled, but in the ocean of fear around him, he felt no fear from these attackers. He answered with a torrent of fear force, waves of yellow light that ripped through the sky. Parallax had already devoured the life of two civilizations. His power was terrifying. David and Clark raised their arms to block. Clark was knocked back, his suit singed and arm burning red though unbroken. David, anchored by his gravity manipulation, hung in the air like a stake. The impact slid off him. When the fear force swept past, David was unhurt. He raised a palm and launched a yellow blast of his own. "Try this taste!" Ever since the Black King template fused with him, David absorbed power as easily as breathing. But using fear force grated on his mind, screams whispered in his ears as he released it. He noted, half amused, half wary, that fear force eroded the mind. Parallax roared and tore up skyscrapers like weeds, hurling them at David. David made them float and turned their mass into playthings. People still lived inside some of them, so he moved the buildings well away. Clark, seeing an opening and banking on David buying time, slammed a punch into Parallax's giant head. A white airwave exploded, rippling for miles and blasting Parallax into the upper atmosphere. "There are too many people here. Let's move the fight," David said. He chased, firing fear force to push Parallax into space. For him, accelerating the creature away and saving lives was simple to do. Though he could control the absorbed power well, its use was unpleasant. Those fearful wails in his head were noise he had learned to tune out. Toma Ray arrived then, grim. He saw the corpses and the ruined streets and lashed out with his ring, weaving a massive green net to drag Parallax into space. Though a capable lantern, Toma's constructs were fragile next to Parallax. The net tore as the monster thrashed. It lashed back with a blasting beam from its eyes. "Get out of the way!" Parallax bellowed. Clark dove in to protect Toma, raising an arm to shield him. The fear force slammed over Clark like a tidal wave. Toma, caught in the blast while trying to hold the net, was ripped away, nearly crashing through a building. Blood trickled from his mouth. Internal organs rocked. He had fought across tens of thousands of star systems, but the aftershock of Parallax's strike left him shaken. He had never felt so weak. If Parallax could wound a veteran lantern like this, could the core really handle such a threat? "You want to destroy this planet? Taste its wrath, Parallax." David's eyes chilled. He unleashed everything, punching out torrents of cosmic energy and channeling the planet's gravity beneath his feet. Each strike sent Parallax tumbling 10 kilometers away. The monster spun and retaliated, but none of its strikes harmed David. Its assaults hit him like a pebble in the sea. Toma Ray, having just felt Parallax's true power, watched David hurl the creature through space. He could only gape, stunned and filled with an indescribable shock. 130, A Passage to Death. On television, two figures battled a giant monster in the sky, forcing it higher and higher toward outer space. The live feed exploded across the internet. What is that thing? A space monster in Coast City? Over 1,000 dead? Are aliens attacking Earth? Go Purple Light Man, Superman. Is Earth's safety really down to two superheroes? What is the space agency doing? They spend so much on space each year. Why no warning? What is the military doing? Just watching? Panic and helpless awe rippled through every screen. In Gotham, at the old Wayne mansion, Bruce Wayne watched the ultra-clear satellite footage with a grave expression, clicking his pen again and again. The veins on the back of his hand stood out. He was restless. "Master Bruce, you know your Batjet can't support you in space combat," Alfred said evenly, standing beside him. Bruce's voice was hoarse. "I know, Alfred. I don't need the reminder that all I can do is watch. This wasn't like bank robbers or street criminals. The bat needs upgrades. I need more contingency plans, so next time I'm not just a spectator. Master Bruce, you are not obliged to bear the whole world on your shoulders, Alfred said, tightening his expression. He'd watched Bruce grow into a life that never stopped demanding wounds and sacrifice. Bruce Wayne had become a mask, and Batman the role he never truly removed. When the storm comes, you'd best be ready. It won't spare you whether you're on the shore or challenging the sea. On the Kent farm, Jonathan Kent and Martha sat on the living room sofa, frozen with the kettle whistling in the kitchen. Jonathan gripped Martha's hand and stared at the television, his face taut with hope and fear. "Go, son," he murmured, clenching his fists as if he could push strength through the screen to the two heroes fighting above Coast City. Up in the sky, Clark accelerated, his powerful frame a missile streaking after the monster, joined by David. They drove Parallax towards space, but their blows seemed to rebound off the creature like rubber. The damage felt negligible. "Use your eyes, Clark," David growled, punching out a torrent of energy. "He's almost an energy being, immune to a lot of physical attacks," David warned. Out of the atmosphere, Clark would bathe directly in sunlight and draw almost endless power. Clark dodged Parallax's tentacles and focused his heat vision with precision. Green light lanced out. Toma Ray manifested a spaceship with his will and piloted it through the melee, firing to harass and assist. Parallax, sensing something, stared greedily at David and lashed his hundreds of meters-long tentacles toward him. "This body I inhabit, though powerful, is not suited to fully wield my fear," the monster rumbled. He was the lantern beast of fear, but he could not completely release his power of fear in this form. Yet he felt the current of fear, smooth and flowing, inside David's body. "Join me, young life form, and we will spread fear across the universe." A gravity field flared around David, his tall, lithe body pushed back with immense repulsion. Parallax's tentacles sank as if into quicksand, failing to find purchase. "I have no interest in that," David said coldly, and sent a city-shattering blow that erupted into scorching cosmic energy. For an instant, a small purple sun bloomed. Parallax was hurled away. Parallax had taken over the body of a guardian of the universe. The guardians had once rejected certain emotions, believing them hindrances to development. That left them ill-suited to dealing with fear-driven power. Parallax thought he could use David because David could control and manipulate energies with ease. David's face was hard. He would not surrender his body. Toma Ray walked a razor's edge, constant tension, aware that if David and Clark ever stopped dealing blows in turn, the monster might annihilate him in a single opening. "Ah, do you think you can stop me?" Parallax snarled. They reached the exosphere and were close to blasting Parallax out of Earth's gravity well. The monster, enraged, began to shrink. His original hulking size helped him feed and intimidate, but it also made him a slow target. In smaller form, he became faster and deadlier. "It's gotten stronger," Clark shouted as Parallax reduced himself to 7 or 8 meters. A single tentacle strike sent him spinning. He clasped his chest and felt the ache of impact. David scowled and unleashed a storm of energy blasts, unbothered by expenditure. But in near vacuum, Parallax's compact form and raw power made some strikes miss. "Don't intervene further. This is not a fight you should meddle in," David said sternly to Toma Rai. Even from a distance, Parallax could wipe him out with one blow. Toma Rai gritted his teeth and remained. "Rookies, it's up to you," David muttered. Where were the rest of his corps? 2 rookies, still undecided about joining the corps, had to handle this cosmic threat. Parallax darted in. His skull-like face leaned close to Clark's, aiming to elicit fear and find a crack in the man of steel. Clark's will prove deeper than Parallax expected. He roared, blasting heat vision while struggling free. "You reek, Parallax," Clark spat. David grabbed a tentacle, yanked it back, and punched again. Parallax's head reeled. "Stronger, because I sensed another weapon." David glanced past Parallax at the distant star, the sun, and redirected a gravity field with a punch, sending the monster spinning. Away from Earth's atmosphere, the sun's radiation would feed Clark, and in the emptiness, the gravitational interplay could be used as a weapon. Parallax, too proud to be dragged into the star, snarled, "I've devoured life energy from 2 planets. My power is boundless." Tentacles shredded and regenerated in an instant. The trio's conflict raged into deeper space. Clark reveled in the sunlight. He felt limitless under that intense flare. David's energy manipulation and gravitic defense left him uninjured, but even he could not quickly finish Parallax. This monster stores too much fear. At this rate, it'll take days, David said, eyes cold. He punched a wound into Parallax's body that looked like it could tear the beast apart, but the wound mended the next second. David could wait. He expected the Green Lantern Corps to arrive soon, but a system message flashed through his awareness. Anger from Parallax flive, a surge of emotional points, larger than David had expected from a single individual. If the Green Lantern Corps defeated Parallax with such an accumulation of fear, David worried he might be lost in the aftermath, an unremarkable footnote. He already had another plan. It's like before. Push him into the sun, David told Clark. Hal Jordan, in another timeline, had tried something similar. The sun's gravity could end creatures that could not withstand such heat and pressure. Clark's eyes snapped bright. The sun's core could obliterate anything. Parallax scoffed. You'll shove me into the sun? I'm headed back to that planet. See if you can stop me. He lunged toward Earth, intent on the lives he could terrify. David's voice was colder than the vacuum around them. Template fusion 40% complete. He extended his hand and reached through gravitational fields, drawing a line between Earth's gravity and the sun's. His graviton ability let him manipulate both fields, linking them like a corridor. The system felt like a template fusing with his power. He had gained a new breakthrough during the fight. Buzzing like a low engine, the two massive gravity wells connected in a thin, irresistible corridor. What did you do? Parallax fought both the pull and the repulsion. The line of force tugged him between two impossible influences, a planet pushing him out and a star pulling him in. He strained to resist, barely maintaining position. Even a tentacle would not move. I opened a passage for you, David said levelly, and then flew up in front of Parallax, delivering a punch that cracked through like a mountain-shattering blow. Energy rippled outward. A passage to death. 131. Take back their lantern rings. 4K5. Under David's powerful punch, Parallax felt like a man teetering on a cliff edge, finally hurled into the abyss. He screamed in terror as a crushing gravitational force dragged him toward the blazing sun. You can't kill me, he roared, thrashing and resisting as if clinging for life, until David gave him no chance. David seized the gravity around them both and rode it like a current. His body, like a meteor, closed in. With one crushing blow, he sent Parallax hurtling. Without pause, he pursued and struck again and again, a relentless barrage that drove the fear entity deep into the sun's surface. The searing heat of the star bathed David's face as he struck a final time. A fiery ripple, miles across, erupted on the star. No! Parallax screamed as the sun's gravity claimed him, dragging him into the heart of thermonuclear fire. His form melted and incinerated, and even the faintest trace of him was consumed. I will return, Parallax promised as his voice died away. When I return, what you? The words faded into nothing. David floated in space and watched silently. A few seconds later, under the sun's influence, Parallax's energy shell was torn apart and the body of the guardian it had possessed collapsed. Under millions of degrees, there was not even ash left. Is it over? He returned to Earth's vicinity. Clark hovered up to him, pensive, anxious and breathless, glancing back. Tomar-Ray watched David warily. He had only seen Parallax sent away by David's punch, and then the two figures streaking toward the sun. What had happened to the monster that had absorbed two civilizations? He's dead, David said slowly. At least for now, you don't have to worry about him hurting anyone. For now? Tomar-Ray's face registered shock. Hadn't David just said the creature was dead? Wait, what is Parallax exactly? As a member of the Green Lantern Corps, you don't know what Parallax is? David looked at him. Old gods like Ares were hard to kill, but in terms of persistence, none compared to Parallax, the embodiment of fear. As long as sentient beings in the universe experience fear, Parallax can never truly die. Hatred from Parallax 300. David glanced at the prompt that blinked in his perception. Now that he had destroyed Parallax's current form, the entity would still be a source of emotional points for him. Parallax will pull back to the source of the universe's fear energy to reform himself, and wait to be reborn, David said. Parallax's true form wasn't the octopus-headed thing they'd seen. It was insect-like, and it had taken on the shape of the hosts it possessed. Tomarre's expression shifted as comprehension dawned. That monster, powerful enough to slay a Green Lantern with a swipe, couldn't be killed outright. Don't worry, even if he revives, unless the Guardians make the same mistake again, a suitable host capable of that kind of power won't be easy to find. That clarification helped Tomarre understand his own ignorance. After all, Green Lanterns didn't even fully know what was contained in Oa's central power battery, the ion of willpower. How could they know all of Parallax's nature? Before Tomarre could ask more, a brilliant flare of green lit the sky. Over 100 figures in green constructs streaked in and lined up, each radiating a battle-hardened authority. Sinestro led them, yellow-clad, poised, his red skin and stern mustache unmistakable. He looked like a knight who had just acquired a peerless weapon and was ready to face a world-shattering threat. "Tomarre, where is Parallax?" he demanded in a deep voice. "You're too late, Sinestro." Tomarre replied, displeased. If not for these two new Corps members, Parallax might have been devouring the living planet behind them, draining the life of hundreds of millions. Is this the Green Lantern Corps that protects the order of the universe? How are you different from local police, always arriving fully armed only after the crime is done? Clark clenched his fists in frustration, but said nothing. David raised an eyebrow at Sinestro's presence. The future head of the Yellow Lanterns, he mused inwardly. But he's still a Green Lantern, for now. Sinestro ignored the newcomers and peered toward Earth. Has that planet fallen? Has Parallax already left? No, Tomarre said. Parallax has been dealt with by them. David hit him into the sun. There was admiration in his voice for the young man who had struck the final blow. They handled it. Sinestro stared at them in disbelief. You're saying these two new Corps members dealt with Parallax? The same Parallax that killed Ab and Sur? At that instant, a transmission routed through the rings of every lantern present. Retrieve their lantern rings. The Green Lantern Corps does not admit Kryptonians, who once attempted to colonize the universe, nor unknown species associated with Kryptonians. Tomarre's face went white. The Guardians of the Universe would confiscate the rings of two who just resolved a universal crisis? Kryptonians. 100 Lanterns' gazes snapped to David and Clark. The Book of Oa recorded history and law. Kryptonians had been a destructive force once, the record said. Hand over your rings. Sinestro's yellow ring flared eagerly. He wanted a test, no Parallax, but Kryptonians to try out his new power on. At that, the emerald of the lantern rings flickered and cut out for a number of Green Lanterns. Their green constructs vanished. Clark, in mid-space, fumbled, his suit gone. Calm down, Clark, David said, a touch of helplessness in his voice. You can fly, and your body can survive in space. Clark had long had a biological force field and could fly, but the sudden loss of his ring's constructs left him startled. Why isn't your ring malfunctioning? He blurted, surprised to see David's ring still glowing. Sinestro and the other Green Lanterns scowled. Their rings had Guardian-encoded directives. The Guardians held greatest authority over the rings. Who tampered with the ring's programming? Sinestro demanded. David shrugged. I just rewrote its program and overwrote the old one. He sounded almost amused that this was news. He had only been in contact with the ring for less than a day, yet his ring still shone brilliantly. Don't you know you can do that? The Green Lantern ring shaped the will itself, and will could be directed to rewrite code inside the device. Hal Jordan had once done similar feats in Legend. David didn't have Jordan's cosmic willpower to conjure rings out of nothing, but decoupling the Guardians from direct control was trivial for him. Those little blue guys gave up emotion, and their handling of emotions is a mess, he sneered. The Corps was stunned. Will could indeed be used like that. A Guardian's order crackled through, urgent. Immediately retrieve the lantern rings. Bring the culprit who tampered with ring programming back to Oa. Sinestro felt the Guardian's urgency. He looked at his yellow ring, conflicted, but obedience came first. Go! Capture them! Lantern rings are weapons that protect the universe. They must not be lost. Criminals, surrender! Sinestro barked. Over 100 lanterns hardened. Their rings flared and projected green chains toward David and Clark. Clark was seized by dense restraints, but he was like a wild bull. He broke free and sent a dozen lanterns tumbling. The remaining chains swept at David, who had shocked them all. His command of will was unlike that of ordinary lanterns, stronger even than seasoned veterans, but it wasn't enough against 70 or 80 rings at once. Lasers of cosmic energy ripped from David's eyes, cutting through the chains like a hot knife through butter. Sinestro, eager to try his new yellow power, shouted, "Surrender, kid," and manifested a towering alien wolf of fear to pounce on David. The beast was swatted aside by a single punch. Dozens of Green Lanterns spawned mechs, hammers, swords, starfighters, laser cannons, and attacked, but their attacks barely fazed him. David casually gestured, manipulating the solar system's gravity to sweep a broad area. Watching his comrades fall like sheep before a predator, Sinestro's confidence wavered. No wonder this one had dealt with Parallax alongside a Kryptonian. But Sinestro was no lightweight. "Try the new power I've gained," he snarled, and wreathed himself in the simulated Parallax form, funneling the universe's fear into himself. He unleashed a terrifying assault that sent several lanterns spinning. Sinestro's constructs were frighteningly effective. The fear energy he wielded allowed him to mimic much of Parallax's might. A thick tentacle lashed toward him. David plucked it from the air and crushed it. "You're trying to use what I just killed to fight me. Have you lost your mind?" David asked. "Is that so? Then let's see if you can kill Parallax again," Sinestro shot back. Tentacles exploded into motes of light. Sinestro grinned while other tentacles swarmed David. The fear-based Parallax simulation had about 80% of the original's power and could endure and fight back. David admitted begrudgingly that Sinestro's adaptation was clever. Current Sinestro is his strongest form, he thought. The Corps' reputation had terrified countless criminals across the universe, and as the only lantern openly wielding fear, Sinestro had access to an ocean of fear energy. David began to pound Sinestro with cosmic beams, into forcing him back while reconnecting a gravity channel to the sun. Sinestro was about to unleash another strike when a terrible pull came from behind him, the sun itself. He turned, struggling, and saw the star loom enormous and blinding, heat and pressure bearing down. Panic seized him. "No, Ring, open a wormhole." Fear clutched him like a hand. He nearly smelled himself burning. Frantically, he opened a wormhole. Like the Green Lantern ring, the yellow ring could create wormholes for travel. Sinestro dove through and vanished. David, who understood the ring's limitations, wasn't surprised. Sinestro had fled, but he wouldn't be back soon. "Ring wormholes aren't that precise," David noted. With Sinestro gone, the rest of the lanterns were vulnerable. David brushed aside their resistance with gravity, scattering them like leaves. Over 100 elite lanterns were flung backward, injured to varying degrees, and they stared at the young man whose presence pressed on their chests. None had seen such raw, suffocating power. "Enough!" The rings of the captured lanterns flared, and giant projections of the Guardians of the Universe formed in space, ancient, solemn faces with voices like the grinding of ages. "That is enough, young life forms." 132. Compromise Beyond Zod, 4K5. Towering projections of the Guardians of the Universe filled the void, their ancient faces stern and indifferent, radiating an air of inevitable decay. "Return the lantern rings," one intoned. "Their choosing you was a programming error. You should never have been chosen." Clark felt a flash of anger. He just helped them deal with Parallax, and now they demanded the rings back without gratitude. Still, he didn't prize the lantern rings above all else. If they could help neutralize kryptonite radiation, fine, but he didn't need them to be Superman. He looked to David. "Why don't we just give the rings back?" Flying beside him, David watched the dozen or so projected figures. That would be far too easy. David's contempt for the lantern rings was obvious. The Green Lantern ring might be called the universe's most powerful weapon, but for him it was a tool, convenient, but not the source of his strength. The idea of surrendering them was unthinkable. "So after we've done the work, you want to take the rings back and act like nothing happened? Not a chance." He spat contempt at the Guardians. "Where were you before we dealt with Parallax? Now that it's been thrown into the sun, suddenly you remember it was a mistake?" Toma Ray, who had remained quiet until now, shifted in his flight. Putting together the pieces of the whole affair, He glanced at the Guardians in disbelief. Clark felt the same grim realization. Without us, Parallax would still be out there in this system. One of the Guardians answered, stiff and cold. The Lantern Rings are the Green Lantern Corps' only tool for maintaining universal order. They must never fall into outside hands. He summoned images. The 3,000 lanterns on Oa, a disciplined force emanating power. Then, a great living planet bathed in green light, larger than Oa and ancient, an undeniable weapon. Green Lantern Mogo, the projection named. David's eyes narrowed. Green Lantern energy is fueled by willpower. Anything with self-will can potentially become a lantern. The Corps included aliens and strange entities, Mogo, a sentient planet among them, a weapon the Corps would rarely deploy. David let out a disdainful laugh. Are you trying to intimidate me, Guardians? He didn't have the power to tear planets apart in the ordinary sense, but here, under the sun's influence, different rules applied. He struck first. A dozen lanterns who had attacked Clark and him were suddenly held fast. Under his power, their arms were torn off with a wet rip, blood scattered into the starfield. The rings flew from those maimed hands and clustered into David's palm, struggling like trapped moths but unable to escape. Green Lanterns surged to protect their comrades, shocked and furious, but the presence of the Guardians froze them. "How dare you, life form!" the Guardians cried. "You are provoking the Green Lantern Corps that has guarded the universe for eons." They had just shown the reach of the Corps, and David had snatched more rings right out from under them. The small blue beings, though famed for having set aside emotion, still wore outrage openly. David's face went cold. "If you intended to use us, you should have expected this. If you're so sure, unleash your Corps." He did not intend to be flattered into submission. The Green Lanterns claimed billions of years of history, but in practice they had been defeated many times. David made a threat that tested the Guardians' confidence. "Right now, under this star, gravity is omnipresent. If your planet Mogo dares 1 inch into this solar system, I'll hurl it into the sun. Test me." Space fell silent. The Guardians' expressions flickered between anger and doubt. No one wanted to gamble with David's ability to manipulate gravity. The Green Lantern Corps were formidable in many ways, but David's current level of power made ordinary tactical numbers useless. And Mogo, irreplaceable, the Corps' ultimate asset, was a line they could not blithely risk. The Guardians' tone shifted. "You eliminated Parallax and resolved a crisis for the universe," they said, almost magnanimous now. "But if we learn you use the Lantern Rings for evil, the Corps will pursue you to the death." Without another word, they closed the projection and recalled the lanterns. In an instant, the mighty warriors who had sworn to never rest until the rings were recovered dispersed, wounded and humiliated. Tomare sighed as David, who had badly injured a dozen comrades, simply turned and left. Clark stared at the drifting limbs and tentacles in stunned silence. He had been bracing for a full-scale battle, fearing his brother's bold stance would bring the Corps down on them. The Guardians had backed away, yet again, capitulating when they couldn't win. "Those selfish old men," David mocked. "They've compromised before, and they'll do it again." David wasn't surprised. They had compromised against Krypton, against Darkseid. They would do it whenever the cost was too high. He planned to reprogram the dozen rings he'd taken, adapt their programming with his will, and give 2 to Jonathan and Martha. "This way Mom and Dad can protect themselves in emergencies," he said, almost casually, tucking the rings away. He thought of a makeshift trophy room. Kryptonite fluid, the sacred trident, a Green Lantern ring, Promethean metal. The list trailed off as he stored away the rest of the willpower for later. Meanwhile, the world was digesting the aftermath. Major newspapers ran the same headlines. Over 1,000 dead, the space creature driven away, Coast City saved by Superman, and the mysterious Purple Light Man. It was the first public confirmation of extraterrestrial contact. Rumors that Superman and the purple figure were aliens had circulated, but now as the evidence stacked up, so did interest. David's role in the fight, more visible and violent than Superman's in many ways, captured attention. The clumsy nickname Purple Light Man felt inadequate. Online debates gave him a new title, Overman, a name that echoed Superman and the idea of a Superman. Praise flooded in for Overman and Superman, unaware the two had saved more than just one city. They'd stopped a being powerful enough to drain a planet. In an underground laboratory, Luther read the headlines with a sneer, the ink still smelling fresh. Two alien monsters chasing another alien monster, he scoffed. And people cheer. He saw a dangerous analogy in invasive species, cane toads, brown tree snakes, creatures introduced to new environments that ended up devastating ecosystems. To Luther, alien power unchecked was the same threat. Had Parallax succeeded, humanity might have learned humility and rebuilt defenses. Instead, people celebrated the invaders who'd chased away an even greater danger. He tossed the paper aside, replayed a video he'd watched a dozen times, and smiled like a predator. In the footage, a green light weakened Superman, forcing him to spit blood. A small canister of fluorescent green battery solution sat on his desk. "Interesting," he murmured. "Radiation from space that can grant powers, and it counters you." He toyed with the idea that kryptonite-like radiation might affect these new figures, curiosity and malice in equal measure. Far away, in a rigid fleet of gray craft moving through the Star River, General Zod stood before a viewport. Zod's beard was like steel bristles. His voice carried the iron discipline of a soldier. "We were sentenced to 200 years in the Phantom Zone for rebellion," he told his officers. "When we escaped, we found ourselves the only surviving Kryptonians." Beside him, Feora traced the glass, grief shadowing her face. Krypton was gone. Everything they had known had been consumed. There was nowhere to rest now. They were refugees across an indifferent universe. Zod's anger hardened into resolve. The corrupt council led Krypton to decay and death. They feared our strength and retreated into comfort. That cowardice cost us everything. He turned to his assembled officers, voice growing louder, compelling. "I will rebuild Krypton. The Kryptonian Empire will rise from its ashes. We will rule this universe again." "Rebuild Krypton, rebuild Krypton," the officers chanted, hearts ignited by the memory of their empire. Zod pointed toward a direction in space. "We will retrieve the Codex Jor-El, launched into the universe." He discovered Krypton's fate and sent our heritage away with his son. That should have been ours, the seed of a new Krypton. "To reclaim its soldiers," Zod roared. The fleet surged forward, engines humming like 1,000 beating wings, and every Kryptonian aboard prepared to chase an inheritance cast into the stars. Mom's raspberry pie is always so delicious. That afternoon, after saving the Earth, David and Clark came home and devoured a large slice. Clark gave a satisfied thumbs up. "Eat slowly." Martha smiled, relief flooding her as her two grown sons returned safely after saving the city. Jonathan watched from the side with a cup of black tea, unable to hide his pride. His boys had driven back alien monsters and saved a city. David set 2 green lantern rings on the table. "Mom, Dad, take these." The battle with Parallax had left him drained, but a good meal had helped him recover. He leaned back, rubbed his stomach, and added, "These aren't the same as the Guardian's rings." He explained what had happened. The couple exchanged glances, unsure how to react to their son's anger toward the hypocritical Guardians of the universe, those same Guardians who had stolen dozens of rings. Running a farm meant dealing with all sorts of people. Jonathan and Martha had learned that official status didn't always mean justice. They'd even had the U.S. military try to take their eldest for experiments. "David, if you take their rings, won't they come after you?" Jonathan asked, worrying about matters that affected the whole universe. "They won't start a war lightly," David said. "Besides, we should just learn to use them for self-defense." After dinner, they went out to the small yard. Martha and Jonathan, each wearing a ring, laughed like children. One conjured a tractor and a lawnmower. The other made a watering can and scissors. Tools, not weapons, because they had no intent to hurt anyone. "What amazing rings, like a universal toolbox," Jonathan said, producing wrenches and screwdrivers on demand. No more rummaging in the attic. Martha carried a materialized sprayer and misted a row of fruit trees. "This season will save us a lot in expenses," she said with a fond, rueful smile. David scratched his head. The Green Lantern ring was one of the universe's most powerful weapons, but his parents were gentle people who conjured tools with their willpower. "The rings can lift hundreds of tons and let you fly fast," he said. "Even if you're not making weapons, that's enough." Clark pulled David aside. "You mentioned an ancient high-tech underwater nation, Atlantis. Does it have anything about Kryptonians?" My ring's database has almost nothing. Clark had finally learned where he came from among the stars and hungered for answers about his people. David thought for a moment. Atlantis's records say an alien ship once landed at the North Pole. Clark's eyes lit up. A Kryptonian ship at the North Pole? Really? David smiled. The ship sounded like a Kryptonian exploration vessel. He told Clark about Krypton's old empire, how it had once colonized much of the known universe, but then withdrew its influence because a yellow sun could grant ordinary citizens power that threatened the High Council's control. Exploration was forbidden. Many vessels were abandoned. If the vessel at the North Pole is activated, Zod will pick up its signal and come here, David said. The son of Krypton would have to go search for his origins. Clark's gaze went distant. The chance to meet Jor-El, even an artificial intelligence that replicated his father's personality and knowledge, was irresistible. David was confident he could handle Zod and the other Kryptonians. Speed was their advantage, but his gravity field could negate that. Besides, Zod's arrival would create powerful emotional catalysts, useful in their own way. A few days later, Jonathan and Martha had learned to use the rings. They returned to farm life contentedly. Familiar routines mattered. After a few days of crime fighting in the city, Clark couldn't resist flying to the North Pole. David rested for 2 days, then returned to Atlantis. These rings, assign a team of scientists to study them. I need a stable way to recharge them, he ordered from the throne room of the royal palace at the bottom of the sea. He summoned Mara and let several Green Lantern rings float toward her. Mara looked at the rings in surprise. Something about David had changed in the short time since they last met. She seemed sharper and more statesmanlike. She had just suppressed a dangerous movement in Atlantis, ordering some people imprisoned in deep dungeons to keep a ruler she distrusted from being overthrown. After difficult choices, people often grow, she said. David only smiled. He'd watched Atlantis's descent grow, and then had deliberately returned after a short absence to clamp down, like damming a river. The immediate flow slowed, but the unrest below would grow more turbulent, which increased the emotional energy he drew from the situation. That, too, had its uses for him. It's still far from widespread revolt, he said. Mara's eyes widened when she recognized the rings. How did you get these? 3 of them. You know them? David asked. Atlantis once fought alongside a Green Lantern when Darkseid invaded years ago, Mara replied. Those rings leave a fallen lantern and choose the next bearer. You intercepted them. It's dangerous. She warned him about the Guardians. They divide the universe into 3,600 sectors and have kept peace for billions of years. Their power is enormous. David waved off the concern. Don't worry about the Guardians. Assign Atlantis's scientists to research the rings and figure out how to recharge them. Mara hesitated. The fact that there were 3 ownerless rings meant 3 Green Lanterns had died. What happened on the surface? She asked sharply, suddenly alarmed. David ignored the question and gave his orders. Atlantis had mastered near infinite energy thousands of years ago. With open permissions and the freedom to disassemble the rings for reverse engineering, Atlantis had a good chance of finding a way to recharge them. Even Earth technology had once hacked Lantern communications. Nothing was impossible. Mara's expression changed as she put together pieces in her head. The implication that the Guardians bullied the weak and feared the strong. If David's knowledge came from personal experience, those were chilling words. She couldn't let her people rebel, and this man who now sat on Atlantis's throne might be more dangerous than anyone guessed. She had already suspected his return had been deliberate. Leave for a few days to let dissent show itself, then return to purge it. She clenched her fists at the thought. David looked out of the palace and rubbed his chin. I wonder if Clark has already activated that ship and met his father. Miles away, beneath the North Pole's ice, deep inside a giant spaceship frozen for millennia, Clark stood before the central control console. The hand that could lift a battleship trembled slightly. He took the black, stamp-like device from his neck, breathed, and inserted it into a matching slot. System activated. Diagnostics complete. Operating normally. Guided imagery authorized, a mechanical female voice announced. A holographic projection formed, a middle-aged man in black noble robes, calm and scholarly, stepped into the central control room. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he looked at Clark and paused. "You've grown into a man, Cal. If Lara could only see this moment." "Who are you?" Clark asked. "I am your father, Jor-El." 134. "Are you from Earth?" 4K2. "I am your father, Kal-El." The intelligent projection of Kal-El hesitated for a moment, then continued. "At least his consciousness, his projection. My name is Jor-El." "Kal-El, is that my name?" Clark felt as if the world had tilted. The answer he'd searched for nearly 2 decades stood before him. Seeing what he thought was his biological father, he opened his mouth and found himself uncertain where to begin. I have so many questions. My son, there is no need to rush. I will answer every one of them." Jor-El's eyes were patient, kind. "We have plenty of time." That evening, a cool autumn breeze swept across the farm. At the dinner table, Clark, who had taken a couple of bites and was smiling absent-mindedly, suddenly announced, "I found them. Mom and Dad." Jonathan paused mid-spoonful, staring at his son. David had returned home after entrusting the lantern ring to the Atlanteans for research on recharging. Seeing the unprecedented joy and peace on Clark's face, David already suspected what he meant. Clark thanked him and then, full of wonder, told his parents, "My people, my real parents. I know where I came from now." Jonathan was stunned. Martha's mouth fell open in disbelief, still trying to absorb the news. "Oh my, that's—" She trailed off, as if wanting to ask something and then holding back. "What's wrong, Mom? Dad?" The table fell quiet. The joyful Clark blinked, puzzled. Jonathan set his spoon down. "This is wonderful, Clark. You found your origin, found where you belong." For a moment, Jonathan, who had never smoked, reached instinctively for a cigarette that wasn't there and felt oddly adrift. "Mom, Dad, you don't have to worry. Clark isn't going anywhere." The couple sat for a long moment, stunned and emotionally overwhelmed. David tried to reassure them. After 20 years, their adopted son had found his home and his people. The next inevitable step would be to return to that distant planet, if it still existed. From Jor-El, Clark had learned everything: who he was, why his parents had sent him away, why he had been launched to Earth. "My home was destroyed by a planetary core explosion. My biological parents died in that blast," Clark told them. "The only thing they could do was send me to Earth to save me from the disaster," Jor-El had said. Martha rose and wrapped her arms around their somewhat melancholy son, stroking his head. Jonathan looked into Clark's eyes and tried to comfort him. Elsewhere, in a U.S. Space Detection Center, the director led General Swanwick into a control room. On the large screen, a massive unidentified spacecraft hovered near Earth's orbit. "General Swanwick, you should see this," the director said. Swanwick's gaze swept the room. The object wasn't a comet or an asteroid. Comets don't correct their orbits. It was too large and structured. Even amateur astronomers were reporting it. "Before this causes widespread panic, I had to inform you," the director said. "We tried to contact them. They haven't responded." Swanwick narrowed his eyes as the technicians described the ship. Its lines, its hardness, a style that looked unmistakably Kryptonian. What do they want? A grand landing? Or are they looking for someone? He thought of the young Kryptonian who had learned to fly in Metropolis over the last 2 days. "Prepare yourselves. Earth may be about to face a challenge," he ordered. Back at the Kent farm, the family watched television. A football game was interrupted by an urgent bulletin. A large alien mothership had been detected near Earth's orbit. Before the anchor could finish the breaking report, Jonathan sat bolt upright. "That's the Kryptonian mothership." Clark recognized it instantly. Jor-El's hologram had told him Krypton had been destroyed, that nearly all Kryptonians had perished, yet here was a ship in Earth orbit. "Zod really came," he said. David raised an eyebrow. After hearing Clark's account of what had happened when he activated the ship in the Arctic, David had expected this, just not that Zod would arrive so fast. "Impatient to reclaim the Codex and rebuild Krypton, are you?" Suddenly the house went dark. Static hissed on the television. Martha, with wet hands from the sink, walked into the living room to see the screen filled with noise and a voice repeating, "You are not alone." Jonathan pulled out his phone. The same message was streaming across every device. "It's a global signal intrusion," David said. Clark listened. Stations in different countries and languages were broadcasting the same words. He sat up, the meaning settling over him like ice. Maybe I'm not the only surviving Kryptonian in the universe. Son, Jonathan whispered, is that ship looking for you? It should be, Clark said, his face hardening. He looked at David. We need to be ready. Don't you want to give your long-lost countrymen a friendly greeting? David said easily. Clark had changed since meeting Jor-El, less impulsive, more aware of his life and responsibility. Jor-El sent Clark to this planet to guide this young race, to help them through their infancy and become a symbol of hope. They might not be coming in peace. Clark explained what Jor-El had told him about Krypton's decay, the ossified social classes, the way roles were enforced by tradition and genetics. Technicians remained technicians, soldiers remained soldiers. Those who commanded interstellar ships were often high-ranking military officers. Clark's voice grew heavy when he described the Empire's nature, ruthless, iron-blooded, an army that had once sought to conquer entire systems. On every screen, a grainy image of a stern, uncompromising man appeared. His voice was cold and authoritative. I am General Zod. I come from a distant world, across vast star streams to your planet, because one of my people is hiding among you. He continued, addressing Clark by name. Kal-El, Earthlings may look like us, but they are not the same. You play the hero on this world. If you truly care for this planet, surrender within 24 hours. Clark clenched his fists. This was the worst-case scenario he'd imagined. A hostile Kryptonian fleet on Earth's doorstep, threatening the planet because of him. And it was no idle threat. Kryptonians who bathed in a yellow sun could utterly devastate a world. David gave him a confident look. What are you going to do? You don't seem worried at all, Clark said. David shrugged as if the threat were nothing new. What is there to fear? I grew up and lived among their people for over 20 years. I know what they're capable of. Clark was momentarily speechless. David's calmness eased the tension in the room, but Jonathan was visibly shaken. The use of the word surrender made the threat unmistakable. We have no choice, Jonathan said quietly. Clark met his mother's worried eyes and made his decision. I won't let Earth be threatened because of me, especially not when you and David live here. Across the globe, the signal intrusion ignited heated debate. Superman is an alien, the headlines read. Some demanded to hand him over. Hand over Superman. Humanity must not be sacrificed. Others panicked, fearing the end of the world. A few voices defended Clark. He had saved lives, even once saved a city alongside Overman, but they were drowned out by the outcry. The next morning, above Metropolis, Clark scrolled through messages on his phone as he hovered over the city. David watched him. This is humanity, Clark. Are you disappointed? They hovered on the wind, waiting for Zod's advance. Clark wore a different outfit now, not the boyish blue tee and cape, but a dark blue, high-density battle suit. Form-fitting, practical, built for combat, yet still bearing the House of El crest. If all it takes to beat me is the voices of a continent, then people underestimate me too much, Clark said, forcing a small smile before growing serious. You shouldn't have come, little brother. In the sky, Clark's supervision tracked the mothership dispatching a smaller vessel. Zod's forces had the reach to hack and speak through every screen on Earth. Of course, they'd know where Clark and David were. If things get dangerous, don't worry about me, Clark told them. You sound like you've lost confidence, David said lightly. And you don't believe I can handle them. Clark sighed. He had grown and become steadier since meeting Jor-El, but David's presence and actions had accelerated Zod's arrival and robbed him of certain experiences that would have hardened him. He thought about what Jor-El had said and the rigid, birth-determined roles of Krypton. A warrior's child is expected to be a warrior. A scientist's child is expected to be a scientist. I am a scientist's son. He tightened his jaw. He was ready to fight, ready to sacrifice, but he wasn't sure he could defeat an army bred for battle. You can't just assume my strength equals Zod's. David smiled. You underestimate yourself. A black ship slipped out from the mothership and descended toward them. David's confidence didn't falter. He let out a small chuckle. And you underestimate a scientist's strength. Indeed, Jor-El was a scientist who had used reason and cunning against Zod. If he had not looked up with relief when Clark's vessel flew away, giving up resistance, Zod might have killed him long ago. The black ship hovered and opened its ramp. a sharp-featured, assertive female sub-officer stepped onto the descent platform. "I am Fiora. The General has been waiting for you a long time, Kal-El." She stared at Clark, noting the House of El crest on his chest. Clark frowned, guarded. "Who are you?" Fiora's gaze shifted to David, hovering nearby. She cocked an eyebrow in surprise. "Are you an Earthling?" "Who are you? An Earthling?" Fiora scanned him from head to toe. In her search for information about Clark, this man had appeared again and again, strong enough to rival a Kryptonian warrior. Still, among the great races of the universe, none fit his profile. "What else?" David shrugged. "You're not one of those General Zod summoned." "Summoned?" Fiora's voice was cold. David sneered. "You flew your mothership over Earth uninvited and call that a summons? This is Earth. Know your place." A mere native of a so-called backward world dared to sneer at a Kryptonian officer. Fiora, clad in black battle armor, bristled, about to answer when Zod's voice crackled through her transparent force field helmet. "I understand." Fiora flicked a nod into the comms and turned back to David with a hard look. "General Zod is very curious about you. You may board the ship with Kal-El, but don't try anything foolish." David acted as if he hadn't heard. Zod had dozens of followers, mostly high-ranking military officers who had rebelled with him. Ordinary soldiers wouldn't have been permitted to join him in the Phantom Zone. Only the dangerous and capable would be here. That many Kryptonians together were not to be taken lightly. "Fighting in space is more to our advantage," David said simply as he boarded the warship with Clark. He peered out through a port at the starlit void. If a war broke out on Earth, the destructive power of tens of Kryptonians would be catastrophic. "And by the way," he added quietly, "your atmosphere is lethal to many species that aren't adapted to it." The warship, several hundred meters long, was tucked into the mothership's cavernous hold. As the hatch cycled open, Fiora crossed her arms and gave David an arrogant, waiting glance, as if she expected him to make a fool of himself. "It's not too late to turn back." "Whether I'm strong is none of your concern," David replied coldly. He didn't need to breathe. What air could be harsh enough to kill an Eternal with nothing more than exposure? A hiss of released pressure, and the hatch opened fully. Before the great transparent viewport, a tall, commanding figure stood with his hands clasped behind his back, facing the void and letting the pale sunlight wash over him. "Kal-El, at last." Zod turned. His voice came out metallic and precise, each syllable like a hammer blow. "Living on this backward planet, you probably have no idea how far we traveled to find you." "You are Zod?" Clark frowned. This man was not the crude, bloodthirsty image he'd imagined. Zod was physically imposing, but his features carried a weighty sorrow, the face of a general who'd always worried for his nation and its people. "It's General Zod," Fiora snapped sharply at Clark's lapse in etiquette. Zod waved her off in a surprisingly easy manner. "Zod, all of your people are aboard this ship, yes?" David glanced inside the cabin. There were 7 or 8 officers visible. His force field sense picked up a few dozen bodies elsewhere on the ship. He didn't want to overlook anyone if things turned violent. "Our homeworld was destroyed. Its collapse, an accident, freed us, prisoners of the Council." Zod spoke plainly, radiating authority. "What you see of us is all that remains of Krypton." Even if only a few dozen Kryptonians survived, Zod believed they could take Earth. David offered a small smile. He wasted no more words. Quietly, he keyed a channel through his force field, knitting a gravitational link between Earth and the Moon. "David, something's wrong," Clark muttered. Lightheaded, Clark swayed. Just as he began to fall, David grabbed him. He scowled, eyes narrowing on Zod. Was there any poison in the universe that could fell a Kryptonian raised under a yellow sun? "Kal-El," Zod said with a flash of cold disdain, "you have lived on this planet 20 years and are utterly acclimated to it. It is pathetic to see a Kryptonian unsuited to our atmosphere." "The ring," David reminded. Clark fumbled the ring from his pocket and slipped it on. The Green Lantern ring recognized a wounded bearer. It activated a healing subroutine and cast a green hood-like helmet over his head, like a spacesuit. Zod's brow tightened at the sight. "You know of the Lanterns," David said with mild surprise. Krypton had been isolationist for millennia. Any contact with the core would have been ancient indeed. "There are many wonders in the universe. My heart has always yearned for the stars." Zod's voice went cool. Yearned for the stars? It sounds more like a longing for conquest and colonization. David's eyes flashed. I've seen footage of you. You have power nearly equal to ours. Which race are you? Zarnians, Durlans, Daxamites? Zod looked at him with a flicker of interest. None of them. The ship shuddered. The crew around them looked up, startled. David's smile hardened. He knew the histories of the races Zod had named. The Xarnians, immortal, near Kryptonian strength. The Durlans, master shapeshifters. The Daxamites, Kryptonians' colonial kin, whose weakness is lead. Suddenly, the warship's pilot's voice cut through the alarms. General, we're being pulled off course. The mothership's engines roared, spewing thrust that could not overcome the invisible pull. The enormous vessel lurched and began to slide away from Earth as if gripped by an unseen hand. The target, the far side of the moon, the pilot shouted. Zod's face hardened as he looked past David at the data streaming across his HUD. You're doing this. David's expression didn't change. He had linked Earth's and the moon's gravitational fields and steered the mothership into lunar orbit to a place with no sun. He had his reasons. Sources of power like Parallax and Sinestro drew strength from sunlight. Earth doesn't welcome you, he said flatly. Take him down, Zod ordered. Armored Kryptonian officers lunged at David. Clark, still dizzy, watched as purple torrents of energy leapt from David's hands. The blast slammed several Kryptonians into a bulkhead, the impact shaking the entire mothership. This doesn't concern you, David called. You are not my target. Zod's glare hardened. The ship carried a planet engine, a world-altering device crucial to any plan of Krypton's rebirth. If damaged, it might be irreparable with current materials. Leave this planet, and I will pretend none of this happened, Zod warned. I'd rather this planet remain as it is, David replied. The mothership slammed into the moon's far side and came to rest in a violent impact that dusted the lunar horizon with clouds of regolith. Kryptonians inside stumbled. Only David and Clark rose calmly into the air. Now what? Clark asked, peering through the ruptured hull at the unfamiliar lunar landscape. Before David could answer, Zod surged forward and struck Clark a brutal blow. His iron fist shattered the insulating field the lantern ring had woven as if it were paper. The blow felt like a meteor strike. Clark's eyes rolled back and he crashed through the hull and tumbled away. Zod launched himself after David, but David retaliated with a searing purple energy torrent that engulfed him and hurled him across the pocked surface. Zod slammed and bounced across the lunar soil, skidding hundreds of meters. General! Fiora and a swarm of Kryptonian warriors roared and leapt at David. On the moon, with gravity low, they moved like bolts of lightning. But the closer they got, the more their speed seemed to drain away, as if they were wading through some invisible bog. David broke upward, shattering the cabin roof and rising above them to watch. This ship is the last technological crystallization of your civilization, he called down. Your armor resists our attacks. Your world engine can remake a planet's environment and gravity. It's top-tier tech by any standard. You are arrogant to look down on us, even if we're all that's left of Krypton. Fiora snarled. She and the others dove down in a coordinated attack. They hit the lunar surface with explosive force. Roaring collisions carved new craters. Heat bloomed into lakes of molten rock, and suns of dust rose where fists struck. These officers had bathed in their sun's light through their armor. Their strength and speed were already monstrous. David remained composed, meeting attacks that could shatter mountains and sending attackers skidding across the moon. He fought well, but the battle was far from one-sided. Zod struggled to his feet, his chest scorched but intact. He glanced at Clark, who had regained some footing and was rising into the air nearby. Kal-El, hand over the codex. Clark braced as Zod launched another devastating punch. He fought to block, to survive, and to understand. What codex? I don't know what you're talking about. Zod's anger made him cruel. He spat what he believed to be truth. Before Krypton was destroyed, your father Jor-El broke into the Genesis chamber during the chaos and stole the codex, the DNA archive of our people. Without it, Krypton cannot be rebuilt. The punch that followed drove Clark backward. His hand came up. His eyes flared red. A column of heat seared out and struck Zod's helmet, snapping his head back and forcing him to release his grip. Clark took advantage. raining blows into Zod until the lunar dust kicked up in white waves for hundreds of meters. "Listen, Zod," Clark panted as he pinned the general. "If you truly want to rebuild Krypton, maybe I can help. We don't have to fight." He had searched everything he could about the ship that had brought him to Earth, hoping to find anything from his parents beyond the black emblem. He had found nothing. No codex, no archive. Still, Zod's fury and conviction suggested he believed otherwise. David floated a short distance off, voice cold and flat. "Clark, do you know where they plan to rebuild Krypton?" "Smallville, the Kent farm." The steady cheering of insects in the wheat fields had an oddly nagging edge to it. At the doorway, Martha stood in her apron, hands clasped tightly, staring at the distant sky. Inside the house, Jonathan paced, jaw clenched, the lantern ring heavy in his palm. The news had just reported that a colossal spaceship had left Earth's orbit. Neither of them knew what it meant. Both were filled with worry. In a hidden bunker, Lex Luthor watched satellite footage on a projection screen, the giant, flame-spewing ship being dragged backward toward the moon. A cold smile crossed his face as he stepped into a high-density alloy green battlesuit. The armor had been redesigned, no longer a lumbering fortress, but a sleek, form-fitting shell. "This suit is only a compliment," he muttered. He clenched his fist and felt a volcanic surge of power. Nearly 20 years earlier, meteorites had fallen on the town, scattering radioactive material and leaving a trail of mutated people who'd gone to hospitals for examinations. Luthor had used his corporate reach to track them down, collect samples, and spend billions on research. The Typhon Project was the result, a genetic font for 10,000 engineered monsters. Excluding traits that would make him look overtly monstrous, he now carried hundreds of aggregated abilities. A gust of wind tore through the bunker as he released the force. He felt Godhunter strength in his veins. "I'm not trying to be a hero. Heroes tend to have tragic ends," he said, smiling. "But this time, I'll be the exception." With that, he broke the roof, shattered the sound barrier, and rocketed into space toward the moon. When the alien factions had finished their fight, he intended to arrive and take everything for himself. A hero who saved Earth? That would be perfect for a presidential campaign. On the moon, the battle raged. Clark watched Zod lying prone and looked to David, who had spoken quietly earlier. Earth was a nursery of fragile humans. Zod's face was swollen. He spat blood and, with a contemptuous sneer, backhanded Clark across the dirt. Clark sailed through the low gravity and slammed into the ground. Zod rose to his feet. "They may not even be able to fight the insects on Krypton," he said, "but they look like us. This world resembles Krypton in many ways. I will use the world engine, what little energy it needs, to terraform this planet and rebuild Krypton." He looked toward the blue planet below. "Here, under a yellow sun, every Kryptonian born will gain power at once. Even if this planet is destroyed, our race will survive. I will not allow our extinction to repeat." Clark leapt at him, trying to stop the plan, but Zod was a veteran commander. He knew Clark's moves, guarded against his heat vision, and pushed him back with methodical, brutal blows. Clark was forced backward under Zod's onslaught, coughing blood, ribs stinging. Across the field, David wanted to help, but dozens of Kryptonians, able to leap miles with ease, swarmed him like predators. They could not wound him deeply, but their sheer numbers pinned him down. If Krypton's heyday had numbered hundreds of millions, it was easy to see how wherever Kryptonians went, they turned other worlds into colonies. David answered with power. He manipulated gravity with one hand, seizing attackers midair and smashing them down, carving a crater dozens of meters deep into the lunar surface. A small blow stung his cheek. Fiora, blade thin as paper and forged from an unknown metal, landed beside him and stuck out her tongue, wiping the dagger. "Your skin seems to absorb force," she taunted, "but small, precise strikes are difficult to handle." David touched the thin welt on his face and smiled. "Not bad. A mosquito bite isn't much, but when there are so many of you, one finally lands." He knew the Kryptonians' armor and weapons were made of materials that could withstand and hurt one another after soaking in yellow sunlight. "But you won't get another chance." He orbited like a living planet, a gravity well corrupting the attackers' momentum. Their punches and daggers bent toward the ground as if pressed by a mountain. David became a cannon, blasting through armored bodies and flinging Kryptonians into distant craters. Even as the steel-like warriors recovered and sprang back like unkillable vermin, he was confident. Without sunlight on the moon to recharge them, he could in half an hour lay dozens of them low. He grabbed Fiora's arm as she lunged again and glanced toward Clark. Time was running out. Clark had been holding his own against Zod longer than anyone expected, but this was Zod, the general. He had the experience, training, and raw brutality of a lifetime of combat. Zod adapted to the moon's gravity like a man on flat ground and closed the distance like a hunting animal. He tore into Clark and demanded, "Where is the ship that brought you to Earth?" "I will never tell you," Clark choked. He felt Zod's grip like an iron vice around his throat. "Abandon this inhuman plan. You'll condemn billions if you rebuild Krypton on their bones." Zod sneered. "You won't speak? We'll see if that weak world forged you an iron will." He prepared to begin torturing the location out of him. David cut in, finally freed a hand after toppling a dozen attackers, and a scorching torrent of power slammed into Zod, sending him sprawling. Clark staggered to his feet and used the lantern ring to heal his broken ribs. The ring's energy, however, was limited. It was easier to mend a fragile human than a man whose body was forged from mountain and metabolism. The ring flickered and nearly died. Clark forced it to stop after patching himself together. "David," he said, ragged, "it's time." David was ready. He had expected kryptonite would be gone, but he had prepared a weaker, liquid form, kryptonite solution. From a steel test tube, he poured a glowing green fluid across both hands like lotion. It began to radiate faintly. He flashed forward and struck Fiora full force. Fiora slammed into the rocky rim of a crater miles away, then tried to rise and felt her strength drain as if leached from her muscles. She touched green film on her face and paled. "What is this?" The glow stirred a memory. Among Kryptonian wreckage after the planet's end, Zod's core had encountered a green crystal that sapped them of power and caused intense pain. "It's like that stone," she cried, warning the others not to approach David. One by one, Kryptonian warriors were sent cartwheeling across the plain, and those splashed with the green liquid collapsed in painful weakness. Still, the solution was weaker than true kryptonite, and the vacuum of space, filled with background high-energy radiation, blunted its effect. Several warriors wiped their faces with lunar dust and tried to rise again. David raised a finger and fired purple energy rays that knocked out those still mired by the solution. At a glance from afar, Zod narrowed his eyes. The battlefield had shifted. Hesitation here could mean death. He barked an order directly to the mothership from his suit's console. "Activate the world engine, now." The ship's AI complied without question. A massive device disengaged from the mothership's belly. It unfolded 3 enormous legs, hundreds of meters tall, spewing flame as it rose, a titan in metal. From its central core, a mirror-smooth, mercury-like surface extended into an articulated mechanical arm composed of silver particles that could reach and transform without apparent limit. "Destroy non-Kryptonian life," Zod coldly instructed. The arm lashed toward David. Kryptonite could not restrain machines. The world engine was Krypton's highest technology, an instrument to reshape planetary terrain and atmosphere at will, and an infinitely potent weapon even against solar-charged Kryptonians. Purple energy rays struck the shining tentacle, but only rippled across it. Undeterred, the world engine adjusted its aim. Its speed was terrifying. Where David's gravity well tried to slow it, the machine redirected and unleashed a device-grade gravity beam capable of crushing mountains. David's face tightened. He wrapped a gravity field around himself, but the world engine's beam slammed into his shield and tore through it. A translucent column of crushing gravity struck him with the force of tectonic plates. Clark watched in horror as the beam overwhelmed David's defenses. The pressure yanked him backward like a stone in a sling. David screamed and was hurled through a 100-meter-high crater, then rocketed miles outward, a comet on a curve into space. "No!" Clark's veins bulged with fury. He launched himself at Zod, the man who had ordered the attack, a rage unlike anything he'd ever felt driving him forward. It hit like a mountain, an unrelenting gravity beam from the world engine that slammed into David and threw him into space. His own gravitational field couldn't withstand it. He tasted the edge of the universe and realized bitterly, a weapon capable of terraforming a planet. My gravity control still isn't strong enough to resist the world engine's beam. Pushed over 1,000 miles past the moon, David clutched his chest. His organs ached from the pressure, but his robust body had already begun to heal. He rocketed back toward the moon. Behind him, Zod's voice carried across space. "Kal-El, hand over the codex, or you'll be next." Clark charged in a fury. Zod planted his feet and met him blow for blow. Both were sent tumbling back. Zod stood, palm to a cheek that throbbed where bone had taken the hit, and felt a chill of realization. Jor-El's sun had become several times stronger. A purple streak receded toward the horizon. David, and Zod's relief was brief. He surged forward again, eyes blazing. "I don't know anything about a codex," Clark snarled, "but you've gone too far, Zod." "You'll understand," Zod replied. Seeing David recoil yet remain unbroken, Zod made a cold decision. "World engine, target me. Fire the gravity beam." If David closed in, Zod's plan to rebuild Krypton would fail. Everything depended on the codex. The codex is more important than the world engine. Only with the codex can I restore my people. The gravity beam stabbed into the sky and struck. Zod gritted his teeth and braced. He was thrown beyond the moon and out toward the sun. His helmet, already shattered by Clark, offered no protection. Bathed suddenly in yellow sunlight, unfamiliar powers began to stir. His eyes flared red. For a moment he could not control the sweep of his sight, but it took only seconds for a lifetime of discipline to take over. Supervision, superhearing, heat vision, flight, abilities he had sheltered from and barely used since Krypton's fall, woke within him. "This is easier than I thought," he breathed. If the world engine had been meant to make Earth habitable by force, Zod now understood it wasn't strictly necessary. Jor-El's sun had shown that Kryptonians could thrive under Earth's sun without terraforming. But the codex remained indispensable. "He's heading for Metropolis, Clark," David said, watching Zod close the distance to Earth. The moon's weaker gravity and his own gravity sling capability cost him speed, but he still trailed Zod almost neck and neck. The three of them, Zod, Clark, and David, plunged toward Earth. Zod, occasionally turning his head, lashed out with heat vision. Clark dodged and returned fire. David, uninterested in the parry, unleashed purple rays from his eyes to press Zod with crushing gravity. One satellite in orbit became an unwitting projectile. Zod ripped it free, swung it, hurled it, and David cleaved through it as though it were tissue. The satellite tore apart, exploded, and pieces rained away, an expensive Wayne Enterprises satellite destroyed in an instant. On the Batcave screen, Bruce Wayne's face had gone dark. He tapped, switched to another nearby satellite feed, and rose without a word. "Master Bruce, where are you going?" Alfred asked, watching the three figures tear toward Earth like gods. "Metropolis," Bruce said. His Fenrir armor weighted deeper in the cave, a suit recently completed, more costly and more brutal-looking than the Batmobile or Batwing. Metropolis seemed at first to have returned to normal, but people still glanced up as if they expected the sky to rip open. Then a shadow screamed across the horizon like a burning meteor and slammed into the atmosphere, a human figure streaking toward the city. Panic spread. "Run!" Zod stopped above the city as if inertia had been snipped. The gusts he created shattered skyscraper windows and sent glass raining down. Screams rose from the streets. Zod looked down with those red, dangerous eyes, and then before David and Clark were within reach, he threatened, "Let me have this block, or I will destroy it in the next second." Clark's pupils narrowed. He stopped and hovered, thinly shielding civilians. "Wait," he ordered, grabbing David's shoulder. "Stall him. The police are evacuating. Every second buys someone a chance to get to safety." David hesitated. In the original timeline, Zod had activated the world engine, and Metropolis had bled. Now Clark's presence and restraint had prevented mass slaughter, but that restraint was Zod's leverage. David's hand held a small vial of kryptonite solution, the weapon he'd brought from the moon meant for Zod. He let a pulse of his cosmic energy evaporate the sample in his hand, showing Zod he could be forced to reveal more. Unseen by Zod, another vial sat at his waist. Clark acted. He vanished and reappeared seconds later, hauling an old Kryptonian spacecraft from his cellar and tossing it onto a street as people scrambled. "Here, this is what you want, Zod." Police shouted orders, shepherding people away. Zod descended and tore the craft to pieces, searching, tearing fist-sized fragments as if the codex could be hidden in metal filings. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Where is the codex? He exploded, heat beams slicing through nearby buildings. Floors collapsed. Hundreds who hadn't escaped were killed in an instant. David moved to stabilize collapsing structures. His template fusion, only 50% complete, had granted him a new trick. He could change the effective weight of objects. He altered gravity at key points, so fractured buildings held together long enough for people to be pulled out where possible, but hundreds had already perished where Zod's heat vision had sheared them apart. "Give me the codex, Kal-El," Zod roared, "or I will turn your city to dust." Clark's supervision showed corpses blooming across the streets. Blood red, eyes burning, he lunged, fists driving into Zod. "I won't let you kill another person," he cried, even though he didn't know what the codex was. He didn't know Jor-El had hidden the codex, encoded genes of billions of Kryptonians in Clark himself. Clark was the living codex, but he didn't know it. David tried to close on Zod, but a falling meteor of a figure slammed into him, smashing the ground and carving a deep gash through the street. "Fiora!" he cursed. Fiora had come, dust on her armor, eyes aflame inside a brand new battlesuit. She struck like a gale, shaping compressed air into a battering fist. Fiora was the only other Kryptonian besides Zod with authority over the world engine and the aptitude to master new abilities fast. Her new suit isolated her from the effects of David's kryptonite solution. She was immune to that countermeasure. David fired cosmic energy and flung her back. He needed to get to Zod while Clark kept him occupied, but Fiora wouldn't let him leave. "Anyone who stops General Zod, or who obstructs Krypton's rebirth, must be destroyed," she cried, and attacked again. A deep, resonant voice cut through the din. On the rooftop, a 3-meter-tall battlesuit landed. Hulking, bat-leak but wingless, forged from an unknown alloy. It was ugly and terrifying. The suit's design, like a monster in a nightmare. Bruce Wayne sat inside, manipulating it with calm precision. "Batman?" someone whispered. David recognized the style at a glance. He blocked Fiora's attack and returned it with a heavier strike that sent her skidding tens of meters backward. Bruce fired a grappling hook from the Fenrir suit. The hook latched onto one of Fiora's armored legs. With a violent tug, the Kryptonian was yanked across the rooftop, momentum slamming her toward the higher ground and away from David. 138, Death of Zod, 4K4. David raised an eyebrow when he saw that the towering Fenrir armor Batman wore had actually staggered Fiora. Bang! She was violently yanked by a bat grappling hook and flung off balance. Agile as ever, she seized the moment to throw an upward punch. The force compressed the air into a tangible mass, sending out rippling shockwaves. The massive suit, however, moved with the surety of a seasoned martial artist, its momentum unshaken. It deflected her blow and answered with a sweeping punch that slammed her onto the rooftop. "Who are you?" Batman's voice was flat. The whole building shuddered. Fiora's brow darkened as her eyes burned with heat vision, lancing the armor's chest. The Fenrir suit staggered under the impact, but took no lasting damage. "The alloy used in this Fenrir armor is almost on par with Kryptonian armor," David observed, recognizing the material. The suit also absorbed energy in a way that reminded him of his own armors, Promethean metal. "An Earthling," Fiora muttered, surprised. She had expected another alien to interfere. Batman's reply was cold and concise. The Fenrir suit's rear thrusters flared, and the armored figure vaulted into the sky, charging after Zod and Clark. Breaking the sound barrier, he sped off. David stole one last look mid-flight, and then turned his attention elsewhere. Promethean metal, Fenrir armor. He recognized the raw material from the military's Zero battle armor. Both were primarily the same consumable variant of Promethean metal mixed with a mutable form. A suit made from it could stand up to Kryptonians, and its unique design matched a description David had once read of Batman's Fenrir armor in comics. Though clearly a prototype and incomplete, it should hold Fiora for a while. He applied a spare kryptonite solution to his hands. At the edge of the city, two figures, moving too fast to be anything but afterimages, collided in a brutal clash. The tremors from their fists and feet shattered nearby glass. Terrified crowds scattered for cover. "Kal-El, you are a Kryptonian. With the Codex, we can rebuild our destroyed world," Zod spat, striking like a man possessed. Kal-El, Clark, was unmistakably Kryptonian, yet he was defending Earth and its people. Zod's fury was a mix of contempt and betrayal. "You traitor! All the power you used to resist me was given to you by Krypton." Clark tore a steel beam from a construction site and swung it, but his heat vision instantly melted the metal into dripping molten iron. "I grew up on Earth. My parents adopted me, an orphan from another world. They gave me warmth, raised me, cared about my thoughts more than their own son." He roared as molten steel poured away. "You want to destroy Earth to build yours? I will never allow it." Clark pushed Zod away with a blast of force. Zod steadied himself with a crackling bioelectric aura and prepared to strike again, but another figure dove in from a different angle. David. Zod's eyes widened when he saw the green on David's hands. Realization and rage crossed his face, and he tried to flee. A sudden, crushing gravitational field bound him like quicksand, slowing his lightning-fast movements to sluggishness. "Zod, this is the end. Earth will always be the world of Earthlings," David declared. "No," Zod howled. He was a warrior and did not fear death, but if he fell, so would Krypton's last hope of being rebuilt. Desperation fueled his swing. Fate had denied him the leaders and methods he expected. Kal-El was Jor-El's son, yes, but there was also this other powerful, unexpected life form, David, who shouldn't have existed on this weak little planet. Their fists met, a thunderous crash. Zod shot like a cannonball through a building and landed in a crater on a distant street, coughing blood from every orifice, dazed and critically injured. David's body, however, remained steady. He watched Zod gasping and bloodied, then said slowly, "How undignified, Zod." Zod's vision bled into blurred red. A final, weak flicker of defiance tried to burn, but his limbs fell limp and his breath stopped. The kryptonite solution on David's hands radiated enough to strip Zod of his powers at close range, leaving him unable to withstand the final blow. The former supreme military commander died on a foreign world, felled by a single punch from a young non-Kryptonian. Is he dead? Clark flew closer and peered down at Zod's body through the hole in the building. He felt conflicted. Zod's desire to slaughter humanity was driven by a fierce loyalty to his people. He could almost respect that. Still, he could not let such plans come to fruition. "That was quite a spirited speech," Clark said softly. "But about your parents, saying they cared more about your thoughts than their own son? I don't agree with that. You just worried them too much." David clapped Clark on the shoulder. Clark, embarrassed, coughed and looked away. He hadn't expected David to have heard him. "General." Batman's voice cut in. The Fenrir armor was still incomplete. It could handle Fiora briefly, but once she used her speed, it had been pushed to its limits. Fiora had broken free and hunted them down. Seeing Zod's corpse had first stunned her into disbelief, then driven her into a fury. "You'll pay for the General's life," she screamed, attacking. Together, Batman in the Fenrir suit, Clark and David, they pressed the assault. They overwhelmed Fiora's defenses and finally ended it with David's punch to her face. Bang. Fiora crumpled unconscious. Like with the other Kryptonians, David refrained from a fatal strike. He still needed them alive for his own purposes. Emotional leverage. One Kryptonian's hatred and anger could be worth more than hundreds of ordinary enemies, dozens of them confined in cells bathed in red sunlight. Resenting him for dashing their hope of rebuilding Krypton would be more valuable than an entire paradise island. As for Zod, David had made a calculated exception. Zod was a natural leader, shaped by his genetics. If he lived, he would always lead escape attempts wherever he was imprisoned. He telekinetically lifted the unconscious Fiora, his expression cold. With Zod gone, this group, accustomed to following a leader, would be far easier to control. As the three descended, Batman, still in the Fenrir armor, stared at Clark and asked, voice flat and probing, "Are you the Blue Hood?" He had already recognized David as the Purple Light Man in public. From the connection between David and Clark, he guessed Clark might be the Blue Hood who had once visited his manor with David. Clark blinked. "You are?" David answered for him. "He's the Batman from Gotham." Clark nodded slowly, taking in the sight of the advanced armor. David's tone turned sharper. "Look at this city, screaming in agony, Superman, even if you didn't mean to. These people died because of you." Batman's posture softened just enough. His tone was not hatred so much as a grave admonition. "Whenever you fly over this city, Don't forget what you owe it, he said before launching the Fenrir armor back into the sky. Clark fell quiet and looked into the distance. He had tried to save as many as he could during the battle with Zod, but it had not been enough. The destruction in Metropolis, the lives lost, pressed on him. He understood the warning as less of a threat than a plea to remain vigilant and responsible. David watched him and felt a small hidden relief. Clark needed this hard lesson. In the comics, Clark often suffered setbacks and even near-death experiences because he was too lenient. If this disaster taught him to use his full strength when necessary, it might be for the best. The three of them quickly returned to the moon to round up the remaining Kryptonians. On the desolate, cold lunar surface, the world engine drifted silently. The unconscious Kryptonians lay where they had been left, but two were missing. David frowned. Each Kryptonian's power was exceptional. If any escaped, Earth would be far from safe. He scanned with his gravitational field and found the count short. "Something's wrong," David muttered. "A rat took advantage of our fight with Zod and sneaked two of them away." Clark's face grew serious. "Here? On the moon?" David pointed out evidence inside the mothership. Hatches had been violently forced. The main console showed a punched mark. Someone had broken in, tried to steal Kryptonian tech, and fled with two unconscious Kryptonians. "We'll need to check who had access. For that, I'll need to borrow your ship key for a moment." They brought the mothership and the remaining Kryptonians back to the North Pole and hurried home without delay. Jonathan and Martha Kent exhaled in relief when their two sons arrived safely. Hearing the story and seeing the news footage of Metropolis, the couple, though heavy-hearted, did their best to comfort them. Jonathan squeezed both their shoulders and said earnestly, "David, Clark, you both did your best." After reassuring their parents, they returned to the Fortress of Solitude with the captured Kryptonians. Kryptonians were vulnerable not only to kryptonite, but to red sunlight. A prison that could bathe inmates in red solar radiation was easy to construct. David ordered such cells, and Atlantis built them in less than a day. Fiora and the others were placed in individual cells aboard the giant Kryptonian exploration ship, gagged, limbs strapped to iron beds, isolated from one another to cut off any chance of coordinated escape. Jor-El's projection flickered to life on the screen. The AI's face showed a complicated mixture of curiosity and restraint as it looked at Fiora and the others. David ran a hand along his chin. The technology that had recreated Jor-El's personality and memories was advanced enough that the AI felt like the continuation of Jor-El's life. "Carl told me some things. Please convey my thanks and respect to your parents, David," Jor-El said sincerely. "Even Laura and I could not have raised Carl better." "I will, Uncle El," David replied. "I'll leave the Kryptonians in your care." "There are also several mechanical guardians on this ship," Jor-El added. "They will be sufficient to guard them while they are powerless." Clark stepped forward with a more pressing concern. "Father, two weak, unconscious Kryptonians were taken away. Whoever took them might have ulterior motives. Control, study, who knows? We need to check the monitoring data from the other motherships." These captured Kryptonians could no longer escape on their own. Now, their captors, or whoever had taken two of them, needed to be found. David and Clark prepared to trace the intrusion, knowing the theft could have far-reaching consequences. Chapter 139. Do you think I care about this? The alien General Zod's invasion of Earth had ended. Overman and Superman had stopped the plan to terraform the planet, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands dead in Metropolis, countless mourning, whole neighborhoods ripped apart. The battle that had decided the fate of the world also made the world focus on the two superhumans. Praise mixed with suspicion. Some thanked them for saving the planet. Others questioned their presence and motives. From what we saw, all this was a giant battle that ruined innocent lives. A few aliens tore down our buildings like toys. Where's the conspiracy to destroy humanity everyone's talking about? Zod kept yelling for Superman to hand over some codex. Maybe he stole something from his people and hid it on Earth. Do you think he came here to bring disaster to us? Didn't you see how Zod threatened both Overman and Superman in public? A good guy doesn't do that. How many times has Superman saved our city? Overman helped drive off those monsters. I don't hate Superman or Overman, but this time it was Superman's people who showed up. Next time, what if it's an enemy of Superman's race? Superman's an alien for sure. Overman, how do we know he's one of us? Online debates spiraled. Television panels ran non-stop. Pundits and celebrities weighed in. Overman's identity was scrutinized the most. If Overman was human, some argued, Earth could demand he expel Superman. Our planet should be protected by one of its own. Clark learned to treat the chatter with equanimity. David didn't care about the politics at all. He wanted to know which rat had snuck in and stolen the 2 Kryptonians he'd knocked unconscious while he and Clark were fighting Zod and Fiora. "Can you trace the other mothership's access logs?" David asked. In the Fortress of Solitude, Jor-El, now an electronic life form, moved the mothership's systems with a gesture and printed a key shaped like an imperial seal. A floating mechanical guardian extended a steel tentacle and dropped the key into Clark's hand. "Insert this in the main control room," Jor-El said. "I'll take over its permissions." After they did, Jor-El's projection manifested in the mothership's main control chamber. He closed his eyes briefly, then summoned a recording. A bald man in green high-tech zero-battle armor had flown through the hole David had made and forced his way to the ship's core. He ripped open alloy doors like paper and made a brutal attempt to hack the ship's systems, only to fail again and again. Angered, he smashed a fist into the console and left. "Lex Luthor," David said, eyes narrowing. "How did he get that strong?" Clark frowned. "Did he upgrade himself with bionics?" Jor-El shook his head. "Scans show he is flesh and blood." Clark looked at David, puzzled. Did someone give him superpowers? It wasn't without precedent. People like Tina could morph into criminal lookalikes, but David dismissed the idea. No, he must have altered his biology. Jor-El smiled faintly and plugged into global networks. If a lone Kryptonian device could hack worldwide electronics, Jor-El's presence was unstoppable. Within moments, coordinates blinked up, an underground facility on Metropolis's outskirts. "I didn't bother with him before," Jor-El said. "Now he's located." David's eyes went cold. "Then let's finish him." Below the city, in a hidden bunker lab, Lex Luthor worked over 2 unconscious Kryptonians. They lay limp on stainless tables, their skin pale from injected meteorite serum. Luthor's white protective suit was immaculate. He spoke to himself as he prepared a syringe, excitement lighting his face. "With these 2 samples, the plan will proceed faster," he murmured. He had scavenged meteorite byproducts that weakened Kryptonians and collected a small amount of Superman's still active blood from the battlefield. His scheme, Superman's servants, was simple in his mind. Clone copies from Superman's blood, use meteorite compounds to stabilize them and give them controllable vulnerabilities. Cloning was illegal, but laws were for the weak. Earlier attempts had failed for lack of biological material. With 2 Kryptonian subjects, he estimated a project that would have taken months could be rushed into days. A cold thrill passed over him as he thought of history's conquerors and the hard choices they'd made. If Alexander had never been born, would he have been remembered? Luthor's mind rationalized murder as necessity. The first time he had killed for his work, he'd felt the moral shock but then set it aside. The ends justified the means. He had almost finished when a change in the bunker's hum made him look up. In his enhanced vision, a grayscale overlay attuned to biomagnetic fields, people around him glowed like candles. 2 of them burned like suns. "They found me?" he said softly. He glanced at the tables and without hesitation extended metallic fingernails. The Typhon Project had given him strange tools. He severed a Kryptonian's arm as if picking a leaf. The limb froze at his touch as if turned to ice. He used the arm as a key, sheer cold hardening his grip, and braced to escape into the tunnels. If it were only Superman, he might have tried to fight on the ground. But the other presence complicated matters. The ground around him began to solidify. His movements slowed. Half his body was buried as cement-like earth rose to trap him. For a moment he fought, then the ceiling ruptured. Dirt and concrete tore away as 2 figures descended into the bunker. "Overman, Superman," Luthor spat, rising with a sneer. "I didn't think you'd find me." David's voice was flat. "You took people you shouldn't have, Lex." Clark's eyes burned with anger as he scanned Luthor. The man was real and grotesquely indifferent. He'd chopped off a Kryptonian's limb without remorse. "Are you talking about the alien war criminals who invaded Earth?" Luther shrugged off his protective suit and revealed a stark black outfit beneath. He tossed the detached arm aside like refuse, dabbing his hands with a pocket square before flinging it away. Superman goes around policing the city, but I run my lab in peace. Which law do you claim I broke? Unlawful imprisonment? Assault? Do Earth laws protect aliens? He taunted. His questions dripped contempt for the idea that non-humans deserved rights. Clark clenched his fists, anger flaring. Legally, Luther had a point. The laws of nations were written for humans. Yet that was not a defense of his actions. David did not argue. He raised his hand, forming an invisible field of crushing gravity. Luther was grabbed like a puppet and slammed into the earth. The floor buckled in a spiderweb of fractures, then sank dozens of meters as the compression turned soil and rock into a weight so solid it felt like steel. Luther hammered, fought the pressure, his skin flaring to an odd rocky texture as his body resisted. He strained, blasphemous blue veins standing out on his forehead. "I haven't committed a crime," he shouted. "Superman and his friend are committing crimes, assaulting an innocent citizen. Can't you see that?" He sneered and slapped a palm to his chest. A tiny red light winked from a miniature camera implanted there. "I bet you want your heroics private. Too bad. You've been broadcast live to the whole world since I turned this on." Clark's expression tightened. If Luther was streaming, their unsanctioned raid would be public and could be used against them. He looked at David, wanting to pull back. "Wait a minute." David's face was unreadable. A vast, invisible hand closed around Luther, lifting and holding him like a small animal. "Do you think I care about that, Luther?" he said coldly. A live TV feed cut out mid-broadcast. "What just happened? I think I saw Superman and Overman questioning someone. Lex Luthor? Looks like he's holding the aliens who attacked Earth." Phones lit up one by one as people texted, their faces switching between surprise, excitement, and doubt. "I just learned aliens aren't protected by law, so do they have no human rights?" But Luther is human and protected by law. In that case, Superman and Overman might be breaking the law. Voices trailed off, unsure. The screen went black. Did Overman do something? He doesn't have Superman's reverence for the law. He seems to ignore it entirely. The live feed, broadcast from a channel owned by the Luther Group, went dark and spawned a storm of speculation. In the bunker the camera had been watching, the lens trembled as an invisible force lifted Lex Luthor into the air. Pressure squeezed him like a mountain, his bones creaked. He glared at David, teeth bared. "Do you think you can crush me like a bug? What if I can manipulate gravity?" Luthor's voice was venomous. He could improvise dozens of powers. Electric light flashed from his eyes and his body shed human shape, becoming a humanoid column of crackling current that hovered in the air, looking down at David with contempt. "Can you control me now?" David frowned. The gravitational hold he applied had no effect on a body of flowing electrons. Where there's mass, there is gravity. Electric current is a directional flow of electrons. Electrons have mass, yes, but it's negligible in this form. Luther raised his hand and unleashed a flash of electricity that would melt steel. Lightning scarred the air and struck at David. "Try to stop me now. If you can tear the earth apart with a wave of your hand, then talk to me." David didn't move. He let the current hit him and absorbed it in an instant with a faint sigh. "It's been a long time since I felt such a weak attack." Facing Ares, Orm and Zod had taught him how little this mattered. The blow reminded him of Smallville and the battered scientist who'd studied the meteorite. Luther had always been fascinated with the town's mutated residents. The thought clicked into place. No wonder. Luther's powers probably came from those Smallville people who mutated from kryptonite radiation. David raised his palm. A torrent of scorching purple cosmic energy poured across the sky and struck Luther. The electrical form that composed him disintegrated. Luther screamed as if tortured, driven backward by the impact. Transformed into current, he'd escaped David's gravity, but that very form had stripped away most of his other abilities. With no other choice, Luther dove for the bunker, tore free a thick power cable, and began siphoning the stored electricity of the lab. He grew as he absorbed it, 3 meters, 10, 15, until he towered 100 meters tall, a living hill of power. "You alien bugs, this is the world of humans," he roared, swinging colossal fists at Clark and David. Clark dodged. When he struck back, He rammed through Luther's chest like a bullet, leaving a great hole and forcing the giant's back to arch. Luther's eyes bulged as he lashed out again. David caught the enormous fist, bigger than his own body, and his energy absorption triggered, making him an energy sink. The current that constituted Luther's body was ripped away. He deflated like a punctured balloon and began to shrink. Luther fought with telekinetic force, ripping away a corner of the bunker and sending tens of tons of reinforced concrete hurtling at David. Energy beams from David's eyes cut the debris apart. The energy Luther had swallowed poured into David as if into an ocean. David's body returned to normal size. David showed no sign of releasing him. "No, no!" Luther's eyes widened in desperation. He condensed a psychic blast meant to reduce tens of thousands to fools and smashed it into David's head, but it crashed against him like a tide against an immovable dam. David's icy eyes did not even flicker. Luther resorted to the only thing he knew would sometimes work. He appealed to Superman. "Superman, are you going to watch him kill me?" He tried to play on Clark's compassion. Clark's fists clenched. He fought the urge to intervene. "Think about what Luther almost did in Metropolis last time," David said, calmly. Clark's face changed. He remembered how Luther, using Clark's kindness against him, had nearly engineered a disaster on an express train by planting a hidden bomb and forcing Clark to exhaust himself, almost turning him into an experimental subject. Clark had saved the people then, but at what cost? And what about next time? David's reminder of the innocent lives Luther had used as bait steadied him. Clark turned slowly away, restraining himself from separating them. "Allowing Lex Luthor to live is too dangerous," David said. "He's cunning and ruthless. If he keeps opposing us, he'll get closer and closer. He'll discover our identities." Smallville was an unremarkable town, a meteorite site by the road. If Luther kept poking around, he would eventually tear into that place and find the people who mattered, Jonathan and Martha Kent. David would never allow that. He tightened his grip like an iron clamp around Luther's throat and coldly drew the last of the current from him. "Life is a sultry day. Death is a cool night," Luther whispered as he went slack. A strange calm softened his face. With a weak, eerie smile, he murmured a line from Heine. "Alexander is remembered by the world for 1,000 years. I wonder if, 1,000 years from now, the world will still remember me, Lex Luthor." David's eyes moved. He released a final burst of purple cosmic energy that obliterated Luther's body. He didn't want any part of Luthor left to become tabloid fodder, to frighten the Kents, or to fake a death. No one could be sure how many biological alterations Luthor had pulled off. Not a single cell would remain. Clark hovered nearby, conflicted and confused. He had stood by as his brother killed, and Luthor's last words had clearly meant something deeper, but Clark couldn't place it. Did he leave some plan, a way to make humanity remember him forever? He wondered aloud. Luthor is vain. He wouldn't want to be forgotten. David shook his head, catching sight of a darker possibility. "Clones," he said softly. In comic histories, Luthor was never above cloning himself or others. He had once mass-produced copies to maintain a symbol, and he had repeatedly tried, in some worlds, to transfer his consciousness into cloned bodies to cheat death. Luthor probably hadn't mastered true consciousness transfer yet, David thought, but he could have left an automated cloning contingency ready to activate when he died. Even then, with Jor-El watching the world, any clones that tried to use recognizable human technologies would be discovered. If clones did appear, they could be apprehended and neutralized again. David allowed himself the smallest measure of certainty. The name might keep echoing, but the threat ends. After handling Luthor, rescuing the two Kryptonians, and moving them to the Fortress of Solitude in the North Pole, David and Clark returned home and rested for a few days. College was due to start soon. For most families, this would be an anxious, exciting time, children stepping into adulthood. At the Kent farm, however, the mood was different. "What did you say? You're taking a leave of absence?" Martha nearly spat her coffee, stunned. "Calm down, Martha. Let them explain," Jonathan said, steadying his wife and pausing to look at his sons with patient support. "Are you serious?" David looked a little puzzled that his parents weren't more upset. "You don't seem surprised at all," he said. "For most parents, this would be a big deal." Jonathan smiled wryly. "You two have saved the world more than once. I've learned to keep my head. Clark, scratching his head, spoke earnestly. I don't think college can teach me anything I need right now, and it would take too much time. He could absorb everything taught in a lecture in minutes. If his goal were simply a diploma for a high-paying career, he would already have had his pick of paths. But the city needed Superman. Clark felt guilt and duty in equal measure. Same here, David said. He couldn't tell them about the two ancient civilizations he helped rule or the energy it took to keep them stable. They accepted the decision. Jonathan and Martha worried only about neighbors' opinions, something they didn't value as much as their son's safety. They were settling into a calm afternoon when the Fortress of Solitude pinged with a message from Jor-El. You might want to come to the North Pole, the alert read. Zod has attracted attention. Someone in the universe is searching for the Kryptonian ship's signal with powerful technology and is heading toward Earth.